Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a story that's stranger than you expect. A desert with no water, but with voices. A golden wasteland so dry it can peel your skin like parchment. And yet something there still speaks. The sand doesn't just shift, it remembers. Bones appear where none should be. Why do they carry no wounds? And what do they whisper when the winds rise before we fall into the endless dream? Tell me, which lost cities would you choose to wander through next? And hey, if you enjoy drifting through forgotten worlds like this, where are you watching from? And which lost world would you build a home in? Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking eastward now, past the rim of the Tarim Basin. The mountains have faded behind you, swallowed in blue haze, and ahead stretches something worse than emptiness, a place traders once feared more than war or winter, the Taklamakan Desert. Even the name sounds like a spell. Go in, don't come out. You've heard that one before. Local nomads repeat it like a chant, but they don't joke when they say it. Nobody jokes near this sand. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not a peaceful kind, but something weightier, like you're walking inside a sleeping throat. There are no birds, no insects. Only the shifting hush of wind dragging sand over itself again and again, like the dunes, or trying to remember the shape of a story long forgotten. Caravans used to vanish here. Not one camel or coin left behind. Weeks later, maybe months, sometimes years, bones would be found lying clean on the surface. No signs of violence, no evidence of scavengers. Just skeletal lines drawn neatly in the sand like nature had carefully preserved them for a diagram. And the bones talked. Not literally, but travelers said you could hear them. On windless nights, they heard voices just outside their tents. Gentle ones, familiar ones. One merchant swore he heard his mother's voice. She'd been dead for 15 years. No one ever opened their tents to check. It's not just ghost stories. Chinese records from the Han Dynasty mention entire military units lost here. One scout returned, saying he followed an echo that sounded like his commander, until he realized the voice was ahead of him, not behind. The commander had never left camp. You try to step carefully, but the sand shifts, like it's breathing beneath your feet. In places, it's pale gold, light enough to blind you. In others, it's red, almost blood-colored, especially at dusk. Geologists say that's iron oxide. Traders believed it was something else. You pause beside a half-buried stone marker, eroded smooth. Some say these were placed along the route to mark wells. Others think they were tombstones. Either way, no one stops near them for long. You move on. At night, the real whispers begin. You lie under a threadbare wool blanket, the stars above you clear and sharp as flint. The camels huff nearby uneasy. You swear you hear footsteps, just one set circling your camp. You sit up. Nothing. And then from behind the dunes, a voice. This way. It's soft, almost kind. And it knows your name. You don't move. No one ever follows the first whisper. That's the rule. There's a second voice later, then a third. They always sound like someone you miss. They always know something they shouldn't. One traveler in the Yuan dynasty claimed he followed a whisper and found himself speaking to his brother, who had died crossing the Gansu corridor 6 months earlier. The brother told him to take a different path home. He did. His entire caravan survived a landslide the next day. So not all ghosts are dangerous. Still, most prefer not to find out. Some say there's an old town buried under the western dunes, a place where people once lived, worshipped, bartered, then simply vanished. And now their memories linger caught between sand grains, rising only when the moon pulls hard enough. Modern archaeologists have tried ground-penetrating radar in parts of the desert. They've found strange, symmetrical shapes, stone walls too regular to be natural, but the equipment often fails in exactly the same locations. One researcher called it electromagnetic confusion. Another just shrugged and said, maybe the desert doesn't like being watched. Even camels sense it. They've been known to lie down and refuse to rise near certain places. Traders would rather turn back than force them forward. After all, a stubborn camel in the Taklamakan might be the smartest creature around. You wake the next morning with sand crusted in your ears. One of your travel companions swears they saw lights dancing on a ridge to the north. You look nothing there. But there's something new in the sand nearby a circle of stones. 7 arranged perfectly. No one remembers placing them. One is warm to the touch. The wind kicks up just as you leave camp. You think you hear a voice again trailing faintly through the gusts. It says, "Wait." You keep walking. The silence deepens, but something new rises with it, an absence too precise to be natural. It's not just people missing from this next place. It's motion life intent. The stillness is too careful, like a story paused mid-sentence. And you're stepping straight into the punctuation mark that ended it. The road narrows as you reach the shadow of an old settlement, half swallowed by sand and wind. No walls, remain no gates. Just a faint rise in the earth where stone once met footstep, and ghost lines where houses leaned together for warmth. Locals call it the city that vanished mid-meal. And even centuries later, the name still feels too literal. What's left behind doesn't feel ancient. It feels interrupted. Archaeologists discovered the site during a dry season in the 1800s. What drew them in wasn't the pottery shards or crumbling walls, it was the candle wax. Dozens of stubby wax pools still clung to ceramic holders as if snuffed in haste. One bowl still cradled the charred remains of lentils. Someone had just started eating. And then apparently, everyone stopped. No signs of struggle. No smashed plates. No blood. No toppled benches. Doors were left open, but not flung. Chairs were pushed back, neatly precisely, as if the diners excused themselves quietly and never returned. That's what unnerves you most. There's no evidence of fear, just absence. You crouch beside a sunken room, half-roofed, with drifted sand. There's a rusted bronze spoon still on the table. Its handle is warm from the sun, but the rest of the space is cool, even in the heat. You'd expect insects here. Lizards, maybe. Even scorpions. There's nothing. And yet when you lean in close, you catch a scent barely there. Cinnamon. Or maybe cumin. Either way, something was cooking when this place froze. Some say raiders took the town in silence, drugging food or water. But why leave the valuables behind? Traders passing through years later still found bolts of silk in storage. Even copper scales were untouched. Others whisper of plague, one fast and strange. Something that left bodies standing just long enough to seem like they walked away. But no bones have been found, not even deep in the wells. No graves either. You run your fingers along the remnants of a mural in one hall. It's cracked and faded, but you make out the edge of a banquet scene, men reclining with goblets, musicians plucking lutes. Celebration, not warning. It makes you wonder what was being celebrated, and what could make a celebration end with no noise. One of the stories says a traveling bard passed through the town the day before it vanished. He sang a tune no one had heard before, low, sweet, and sad. That night they feasted, and by morning they were gone. The bard never seen again. You wander through what's left of the bathhouse stone benches, a collapsed furnace chamber. A traveler's journal from the 13th century mentions steam still rising from these vents. When they arrived, though no fire had burned for days, the air was warm, the rooms were dry, but no one answered when they called out. Your boots scuff something small, round polished, a child's play bead, blue glass. It sparkles in the light, oddly clean. You pocket it without thinking. Later, you'll forget doing that. Somewhere toward the center of the ruins, you find a circular well, ringed with flat stones. You peer inside. No water, no echo. Just darkness, too deep for the sun to reach. According to one Silk Road legend, this town had a ritual of blessing their meals, with words not meant for outsiders to hear. A private language passed through generations. Some believe it was older than the town itself, protective perhaps, or forbidden, or the night before the disappearance, an outsider demanded to be included. Some versions say they forced their way in. Others suggest it was simply a polite guest asking to belong. And so the blessing was spoken aloud to everyone. The next morning silence. Your guide, who's been oddly quiet since entering the ruins, finally speaks. Let's not linger, they murmur. These stones, they wait for listeners. You glance back as you leave the last half-buried room. The sun flares behind the dunes, casting long shadows across the site. For a split second, you could swear you see movement, someone walking between pillars, arms lifted in mid-gesture. But when you blink, it's just the wind. You don't speak again until campfire. And when you do, it's only to ask, have you ever seen a town that looked like it forgot to breathe? Your guide doesn't answer. They just toss another pinch of cumin into the fire. You leave behind the vanished city, but not the quiet. It clings to you like fine dust settling in the folds of your robe behind your ears, in the corners of your thoughts. The road is flatter now, the air thinner. But something strange keeps rising from the dunes themselves. Not shapes, not voices this time. Something stranger sound. You first hear it at dusk, as the shadows lengthen and the sands begin to cool. A low hum, distant but deliberate. Not the wind, not any wind you've heard. It comes in waves, each one starting just as the last ends, like breath pulled through a cracked door. At first, you think it might be your imagination. Maybe it's the weariness settling in, or the ghost of that last ruined town still pressing on your ears. But then your camel stops. It freezes, ears pricked neck low, one leg lifted mid-step. You look around. Nothing. But the hum is louder now, more urgent, less like humming, more like groaning. No, not groaning, grieving. This is your first encounter with the singing sand dunes. Locals have other names for them. Some call them the moaning hills. Others, the sighing teeth. One trader you met back at the market in Kashgar called them the place where the sky touches earth, but neither likes it. You thought he was being poetic. Now you're not so sure. Geologists have explanations, of course. They talk about grain-size humidity layers of sand sliding over each other in perfect conditions. When the surface layer shifts just right, it creates vibrations, acoustic resonance, like a giant speaker cone under your feet. But those scientists never slept here. They never listened to the sounds change depending on who was walking. Never noticed how the hum grew louder when someone told a lie. Never met the man who swore the dunes sang his name the night before he vanished. You make camp on the flattest ground you can find, not too close to the base of the tallest dune. Your guide insists on placing stones around the perimeter. To break the line, they say, as if the desert draws circles and hates being interrupted. The fire crackles low. You try not to notice how quiet the air becomes when the flames die down. Then just before sleep claims you, the sound begins again. This time, you know it's not wind. It begins in the east, a high-pitched note that trembles into your bones. Then another, from the south, deeper, sadder, like the earth itself is mourning. By midnight, you're surrounded by a chorus of tones rising and falling in slow, aching harmony. It's beautiful and unbearable. Some travelers describe the sound as music. Others say it's closer to weeping. One monk, in the 10th century, claimed he transcribed the dunes song and used it as the base for a funeral chant. That chant was later banned. Too many people cried uncontrollably when they heard it. You lie awake, eyes wide, blanket pulled to your chin. You tell yourself, it's just sound, just friction, just physics. But when the pitch shifts again, something inside you shifts too. Not fear, more like recognition. The dunes aren't just making noise. They're telling you something. One melody in particular keeps repeating a slow, four-note descent, almost like the start of a lullaby. Every time it begins, your chest tightens like you've heard it before. But not in this life. Your guide doesn't sleep either. You catch them softly muttering under their breath. Not prayers. Not quite. More like apologies. Some legends say the dunes sing only when someone in the camp is carrying a secret. Others say the sands remember footsteps, especially those that never came back. You think back to the city you left, to the meals abandoned mid-bite. You wonder if the people there heard these same tones maybe the night before they disappeared. Or maybe the dunes were mourning them before they even vanished. You drift in and out of sleep, dreaming of mirrors made of salt and voices speaking in sand. In one vision, you stand atop the tallest dune arms raised, and the entire desert vibrates beneath you. Your voice joins the sound. You don't know the language, but the dunes understand. You wake just before dawn. Silence. Even the camels are still. The fire is cold, your breath visible. Your guide is already packed. Did you hear it, you ask? They nod, but won't meet your eyes. Do you know what it meant? They shake their head, but then pause. It only sings like that. They whisper when someone's path is changing. You don't ask more. Some answers stay buried, better than bones. You saddle your camel and ride on. The dunes grow smaller in the distance, but the melody lingers in your head and your bones. It will follow you softly forever. You travel lighter now, though you haven't lost any gear. It's something in your posture, the way you breathe, a subtle shedding of certainty. The path ahead winds tighter, and the landscape shifts again. Less whisper, more bite. You're entering territory where trust isn't a currency, it's a liability. You stop that evening near a narrow stream bed where a string of worn tents forms a loose camp. Most are patched with yak hair and faded wool, some painted with symbols you don't recognize. Others bear clear warnings, jagged white lines, red dots and circles, meant not for decoration, but deterrence. Your guide raises a hand and mutters something under their breath. You're not alone here. The traders who greet you don't smile. They nod slowly, eyes scanning you the way a snake watches a bird too big to eat, but too close to ignore. You've met merchants before, loud ones, shrewd ones, clever enough to trick you into buying an empty box with pride. These are different. They're quiet, careful, and armed in ways that don't make sense. Not swords or bows, not even knives. Snakes, live ones, coiled in baskets, wrapped in thick cloth, even one unbelievably curled asleep in a carved wooden bowl head resting like a dog by a fire. The merchants handle them with a calm reverence, as if they're not tools, but partners. You're offered tea. It's bitter. You drink slowly. As the sky darkens, you begin to understand how these people survive the Silk Road's crueler stretches. Not by trust, not by strength, by threat. Snake pits, small, hidden, strategically placed, are scattered throughout their camp. You watch as a merchant calmly places a coil of thin rope over one such pit, marking it for his own people. He glances at your boots and says, "Don't step left when you stand. Right is fine. You don't ask what happens if you forget." Later near the fire, you hear stories softly shared between sips of rice liquor. Tales of raiders approaching only to freeze when they hear the hiss, of poisoned bandits found miles away, convulsed in silence, of camels that refuse to kneel where the pits were buried. But not all the stories are proud ones. One elder admits to an accident. A young boy, his own nephew, stumbled into a trap one night. "Wrong tent flap," the man mutters, looking into the flames. The snake didn't know. It just did what it was trained to do. Another merchant adds, "Sometimes the traps kill our own camels. They don't remember the marks, and yet no one questions their use." Here in this barren corner of the world, where sand can smother in minutes and bandits hunt for silence more than gold, the choice is simple: trust no one, except maybe the snake. A younger trader face, wrapped tightly, eyes sharp, tells you about a man who tried to steal from them. He didn't know where the traps were. He ran. They found him curled like a 3 dunes away. Lips blue, a serpent still twined around his wrist. They buried the thief, but not the snake. That one earned a new name, Ashla, which means reminder in their dialect. You sleep that night, wrapped in your blanket knees, pulled in careful not to twitch. Even your dreams feel measured, like your mind is tiptoeing through traps it can't see. In the early hours, you wake to a sound, a soft rattle. Not close, not far. A snake passing, or just the wind through a reed basket. You don't move. The stars overhead flicker like watching eyes. One of the traders snores quietly. Another walks past his silhouette, holding a lantern that swings too gently to disturb the air. And there, near the edge of your tent, you catch a flicker of movement. A thin, slithering line that stops, lifts its head, and gazes right at you. Not threatening, not afraid, just watching. You stare back. After a moment, it dips its head and disappears into the sand. In the morning, the older trader tells you that if a snake visits your tent and doesn't bite, it means you're being tested, or spared, he says with a shrug. You don't ask which one it was. You saddle your camel and give it a pat, carefully checking beneath its blanket. Nothing. Still, you ride with your feet pulled slightly back, just in case the sand has memory and the snakes do too. You travel onward, but the feeling of being watched doesn't fade. In fact, it deepens, becomes subtler, colder, like the desert's awareness has shifted from threat to curiosity. You're not prey. Not yet. But something wants to know what you'll do when the shadows reach your bones. You arrive at a crescent-shaped valley just past midnight, your camel panting from the climb. The land here is quiet, not in the usual way, but like a held breath, waiting to see who enters and who doesn't leave. A circle of tents waits in the hollow, their frames stitched from yak hide and coarse felt painted with blue spirals and white suns. You've seen many camps before. This one is different. They're too still. No voices, no dogs barking, no laughter or clatter of pots. The only sound is the wind curling around the tents, low and rhythmic, like whispering. Your guide dismounts, but doesn't approach. Instead, they stare at the tents and murmur, "This is where they saw it." You ask what they mean. They point to the largest tent at the center, its entrance open, just a sliver. The ones who came out weren't the same. Hair gone white, faces cracked. They wouldn't speak, only stare. You step closer, curiosity outweighing good sense. The inside of the tent is dim lit only by the red-orange glow of a smoldering coal in a ceramic bowl. The air smells of boiled milk and cedar ash. It's warm, too warm. There are no people inside, but you feel like you're not alone. You sit down slowly, as if interrupting a conversation mid-sentence. The thick yak wool walls sway ever so slightly, and the whispering rises not from outside, but from the fabric itself. It sounds like stories, half-formed phrases, names you almost recognize, questions that don't wait for answers. You close your eyes, and then briefly, just for a moment, you see something. A vision, but more solid than that. A silhouette outside the tent, impossibly tall, moving against the wind instead of with it. Its hands brush the tent wall, and every thread it touches turns silver. You open your eyes. The coal glows steady. Nothing's changed. But when you touch your hair, something crackles beneath your fingers. A strand falls into your lap. White. You leave the tent in a daze, blinking against the starlight. Your guide watches you with narrowed eyes. It showed you something, they say. Did it take something too? You don't answer. Around the fire that night, you hear more of the stories of traders who entered those tents, young and strong, and left with shaking hands and eyes that couldn't focus. Of a woman who claimed she'd spoken to a god wearing her father's face. Of a boy who slept inside and woke up calling himself by a different name. Some think it's the cold, a trick of the altitude and the thin air. But the warmth inside those tents is unnatural. It clings to your skin long after you've stepped away. One traveler, an old man with leathered skin and a voice like rust, tells you the secret. They say time bends there, not forward, not backward, sideways. You don't know what that means. You don't want to know. Later that night, your dreams tangle with memories you don't recognize. You see a marketplace you've never visited, smell bread you've never tasted, hear a voice calling a name you've never had. You wake before dawn. Your hair is darker again. Just a trick of light, maybe. Or maybe it only fades under starlight. The tents are quiet behind you as you leave. No one stirs. No fires burn. No footsteps follow. Your guide rides behind you, humming a tune you didn't notice them start. You turn to ask where they learned it, but the look in their eyes stops you. You ride on with that warmth, still clinging to your skin like a second memory. The road grows thinner, not in width, but in certainty. Each mile feels like a question with no punctuation, a sentence stretched too long. And then just when you think the desert has nothing left to show you, it shows you yourself. But not where you expect. You first notice it in the distance, dust kicking up in rhythm, the way caravan hooves echo across hardpan earth. Your guide spots it too. They shade their eyes, then freeze. There's someone coming, they murmur. But the strange thing is, they don't sound surprised. They sound uneasy. You squint into the horizon. Shapes emerge, silhouettes against the haze. A caravan like yours. 6 camels, maybe 7. Riders dressed in layered silks and leather wraps. Familiar outlines. Too familiar. Your guide mutters again, this time in a language you don't understand. You catch one word repeated like a warning oral. You ask what it means. It means reflection. As the figures grow clearer, your stomach twists. The lead camel walks with a slight limp, just like yours. One of the riders gestures broadly when they speak your habit unmistakable. And then you see the unmistakable yourself, riding, leading, laughing at a joke you haven't heard yet. The approaching caravan is a mirror, exact down to the cut of your scarf and the way your camel chews nervously when you glance back. You raise a hand. Your reflection raises theirs. Not a beat too late, not too early. Perfectly timed. The moment stretches. Logic tries to intervene. You think mirage, heat, delirium. But the air is cool today, the sky clear. The ground is dry, not the kind that bends light, not enough to warp reality. Don't greet them. Your guide says suddenly, voice sharp. Whatever you do, don't speak. You don't, but others have. There are stories about the mirror caravan, tales whispered by desert nomads and passed on by trembling scribes, of travelers who met themselves on the road and walked up to say hello. They were never seen again. Some say the reflection smiled too wide. Others claim they looked sad, almost pleading. And some say they didn't speak at all, only held out their hands and waited. You and your double keep approaching, just a few camel lengths apart now. The wind picks up tossing sand between you, a veil of motion and warning. Then the reflection stops. Your group stops too. The camels won't move. Their ears flatten. Their bodies freeze. Your reflection dismounts. So do you. The other you steps forward. So do you. One of you hesitates. You're not sure which. Then, without warning, your reflection turns and walks away. The rest of the mirror caravan follows. Their footsteps stir no dust. Their camels leave no tracks. And soon, they're gone. No horizon swallowing them. No trail left behind. Just the empty land, blank and unburdened. You look down at your own feet. Your prints are still there. Your guide exhales slowly. That was close. You want to ask what would have happened, but the answer tastes bitter before you speak it. You ride in silence for hours after scanning the edge of the world just in case something else comes back from it. Later at camp, your reflection still lingers, not out there, but in your mind. You sit by the fire and try to remember which one of you blinked first, which one turned away, and whether they were leaving or going ahead. You dream that night of two shadows walking hand in hand across a dune. One disappears, the other keeps walking. The farther you go, the stranger the rewards become. Not riches, not even survival. Just stories, odd half-finished ones like meals left out in a storm. And now your next discovery isn't something buried or broken. It's something deceptively ordinary. A trade good, a taste, a trap, salt. That's what draws you to this next camp, a glimmer of white under burlap, a glint like moonlight caught in a fold. Salt slabs stacked neatly in a corner, each one polished flat, each one wrapped in wool to keep from crumbling. Salt is currency out here, more valuable than silk in some places. It preserves meat, it heals wounds, it keeps horses from collapsing. A single clean slab can be worth more than gold, because unlike gold, it keeps people alive. But not these slabs. You arrive to find a campsite deserted. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. Just a strange, heavy stillness, like the very air forgot how to move. The fire pit is cold. Bowls are overturned. One is cracked clean, in two, not shattered, as if split by something gentle but precise. and every tent flap is open. Not blown, not ripped. Opened like doors waiting for guests that never came. You find the salt slabs near the largest tent. 6 of them. Smooth, pale, unblemished, too perfect. Your guide frowns, kneels beside one, and scratches its surface with a copper coin. The coin leaves no mark. That's not right, they mutter. You ask if it's fake. No, they say. Worse, it's true. That night you set camp away from the site, but not too far. The curiosity is stronger than the fear now. You want to know what happened? And just after moonrise, you do. You wake to the sound of coughing. Soft, wet, not human. It's your camel. You check it. Its breath is shallow. Its eyes glassy. Its tongue parched. You try to offer water. It refuses. Your guide grabs your wrist. Did you touch the salt? You nod. Did you taste it? You shake your head. They exhale. Then you'll live. Some weren't so lucky. A story surfaces in your guide's voice, one thread at a time. A merchant caravan once traveled through this same valley. They carried crates of rare salt, gifted by a warlord from the southern steppes. Perfect blocks, carved and wax-sealed. The first night, a camel died. The second, a boy began speaking in riddles about the salt remembering things. He collapsed by morning, lips white. The third night, 4 men never woke up. The salt slabs remained untouched, but one was found leaking something, a clear liquid with no scent. A scholar in Samarkand once tested a similar sample and found spores not living, not dead. Something in between. A dormant fungus, maybe. One adapted to survive centuries in dry heat. And when exposed to breath or warmth, it reawakened. But how did it get inside salt? No one agrees. Some say the salt came from a cursed mine, one that collapsed with all its workers still inside. Others say it's not natural at all, that the slabs were once offerings solidified over generations from tears poured into sacred basins, then cut into trade bricks when the temple fell. Your guide says little else, just builds a small fire ringed with iron stones and watches it like it might speak. You don't sleep that night. When morning comes, your camel is better. Weak, but breathing steady. You decide to ride on. But as you leave the valley, something catches your eye, a shimmer beside one of the abandoned salt slabs. You dismount. Approach. It's a shape vague faint reflected in the polished salt. Not your reflection. Someone else. Older. Eyes closed. Lips moving. You step back, heart hammering. The image vanishes. Your guide says nothing. Only points to the horizon. We don't speak to slabs that remember. You ride faster after that. Salt might preserve, but it never forgets. By now, even the road feels uncertain. It winds where no paths should wind, hugs cliffs that never appeared on maps. And just as you think the terrain has settled solid, trustworthy, you come to a place where traders once walked on air. Until they didn't. The Tian Shan Mountains rise before you, like frozen waves jagged and blue in the morning light. Their peaks glint with snow, even though it hasn't snowed in weeks. The path here narrows to a ledge, barely wide enough for a camel's foot. Below a ravine, so deep, it doesn't echo. This is where they say the bridges once stood. Invisible ones. You dismount. Your guide mutters a prayer you've never heard before. It doesn't rhyme, and it doesn't sound hopeful. The wind whistles low. It sounds like breathing, but not yours. There are no ropes, no wood, no remnants of construction. Just a few stone posts on either edge of the gap, weathered smooth as if hands once tied something to them that the wind eventually took. But the stories say otherwise. Centuries ago, travelers crossed these ravines without fear. The ghost bridges, they called them. You'd step out onto nothing, and the air would hold you. cold and invisible, but firm as ice. The trick, they said, was not to doubt. You look across, maybe 15 steps. The other side feels both impossibly close and immeasurably far. Your guide says the last known crossing happened 50 years ago. An old woman with no pack, no shoes, just a stick and a whisper. She didn't hesitate. She made it. No one else has. There's a newer path carved clumsily into the mountain wall half a mile down. It adds hours to your journey, but at least it feels like something humans built. Still, the temptation tugs at you. You look again across the gap. The sunlight plays tricks. Dust kicks up in small gusts, swirling in perfect arcs, then vanishing as if erased. You take a pebble from your pouch and toss it forward. It falls. Silently. No thud. Just gone. Your guide nods grimly. No bridge today? You turn to go. But behind you the air shimmers. Not like heat shimmer. Like memory shimmer. You catch a glimpse, just a flicker of something stretched across the ravine, a translucent band, wide enough for 1 foot at a time. Not glowing. Not humming. Just there. Then not. You walk the long path instead. It hugs the rock wall so tightly your shoulder scrapes raw against stone. The camels groan with each turn. One nearly slips. You feel your breath shorten with every step. But eventually, you reach the other side. Your legs ache. You look back at the ravine. Still empty. But now, there's a new mark carved into the far side stone. Fresh. One line. Then another. A small bridge symbol, shallowly scratched just enough to catch the light. Your guide sees it too. No one's been across in years, they whisper. But the mark is real. Someone crossed. You wonder what they saw, what held them up. Ice wind memory. Or belief. That night by the fire you hear more about the bridges. Some say they were built by monks who mastered the air, whose footsteps were so gentle the earth forgot they were there. Others claim it was an ancient roadkeeper's pact, a promise made to the wind itself. As long as travelers walked with purpose, the air would carry them. But if you hesitated, even once, you'd fall into history unwritten. You lie awake tracing your fingers over a stone you picked up near the ravine. It's smooth and cold, shaped like a teardrop. Or a toe. Either way you keep it, just in case. The mountain air thins behind you, but the pressure in your chest does not. Ahead lies shadow, not from weather, not from doubt, but from stone itself. Carved deep into cliffs and cooled by centuries, these caves once promised shelter. Now they offer questions that flicker like flame. You descend toward a canyon dotted with hollowed-out cliffs. From a distance, the caves look like empty eyes peering across the plain, silent watching, waiting. You've seen cave dwellings before, but these feel less like homes and more like decisions someone made a long time ago and then quietly regretted. The path winds downward, skirting an old stream bed, now filled with brittle grass. Your camel pauses, ears twitching, and for the first time since you left the ravine, it refuses to move forward. Your guide doesn't argue. We walk from here, they say. You continue on foot. The wind dies completely as you approach the first cave, and the heat drops with it, sharp and sudden, like stepping from sunlight into the memory of winter. Inside the first cavern, someone has carved shallow benches along the walls. Strange symbols decorate the stone, part writing, part scratching. One pattern repeats a pair of eyes, almond-shaped with red dots at the center. Painted no. The pigment gleams. Embedded. Lantern eyes, your guide says. They watch the watchers. You ask what that means. They don't answer. At twilight, you and your guide, set camp just outside the largest tunnel. You're told never to sleep inside, not because of collapse or cold, but because some sounds belong to the stone. As dusk deepens, the caves begin to glow, not from fire, not from the sky, but from within. Faint pinpoints of red begin to pulse in the deeper crevices. At first, they look like dying embers, but there's no heat, no smell, no flicker, and they move. One light blinks, another shifts a few inches, then another sliding into shadow without illuminating a single surface. Your guide is already standing hand near their blade, not to use it, but maybe to remind whatever's watching that they still remember how. You ask what the lights are. Signals, maybe they say. Some say bandits once used them. Reflections from polished stones deep inside the tunnels. Silent warnings to each other, but they look unconvinced. You try to count the lights. 13. No 14 now. One more just blinked to life behind a collapsed ledge. Your heart beats louder than your footsteps as you creep closer. Suddenly a sound soft like gravel shifting. You freeze. And then a whisper. Not a voice? Not exactly. More like the memory of a voice. A shape and sound. Your name. You step back, hands shaking. Your guide grabs your arm. Never speak to lights, they whisper. Not here. You nod. Stories drift through the night quiet as steam off rice, of entire caravans who slept inside the caves and were found frozen not by cold, but by fear. Expressions locked in terror. No wounds, no blood. Just silence. One tale tells of a boy who followed the red lights deep into the stone. When he returned, he was 20 years older. His mother didn't recognize him. He never blinked again. Another story says the lights are eyes, not metaphorically, literally, not alive in the way we understand, but ancient and aware. Eyes that only open when someone with something to hide walks past. And they see everything. You sleep that night with your back to the fire eyes on the cave. The lights pulse gently until midnight, then blink out one by one, as if they've seen enough. You wake at dawn. Your guide is already packed, but the cave now bears something it didn't before: a mark in the dirt just beside the entrance. Your footprint, and beside it, another, longer, bare, facing yours. The next leg of your journey should feel safer. You're descending now, the air less thin, the sky wide again. But safety is a fickle illusion out here. And sometimes the most unnerving dangers come dressed in beauty and in silence that sings. You arrive in Dunhuang just before sunset, a city that feels like a mirage made solid. It's calmer than you expected. Dusty markets still hum. Prayer wheels turn lazily in temple courtyards. But you're not here for silk or stone. You're here for the monks, specifically for the ones whose robes sang. The story came from a passing scholar back in Khotan. He described it like a joke at first: monks who wore their music, whose garments whispered hymns even when they walked in silence. You laughed then. Now you're not so sure. You're led to a smaller monastery outside town, half dug into the rock, painted with faded blue dragons. Inside, it's cool and echoless. The walls are thick with dust and reverence. The abbot greets you without speaking. He just nods, turns and gestures for you to follow. You do. In the inner chamber, robes hang on hooks, carved directly into the stone, dozens of them. Pale linen, deep saffron, indigo with green cuffs. All still. All humming so faintly you think it might be your ears ringing from the cave winds. Until one of them sings. Not loudly. Not a melody you know. Just a long, low note, clear as glass, soft as fog, rising from one of the blue robes as it shifts in the breeze. The abbot bows to it, then turns and finally speaks. Not every robe sings. Only those who remember. You want to ask what they remember, but he's already moving deeper. Along the corridor are stories carved into the stone illuminated with gold leaf worn by time. They show monks walking through storms, their robes billowing tiny symbols around their garments, indicating sound-wavy lines, birds and flight bells without clappers. Some say the robes were woven with threads soaked in chant water fabric, baptized in centuries of prayer. Others believe it's not the robes, but the monks. That once a monk reached full clarity of mind, their aura would vibrate and the cloth would echo it. You reach the chamber of silence, a round room domed with a single threadbare robe in the center, so pale it seems almost made of ash. It sits on a wooden frame, unmoving. The abbot says, "This one sang a funeral song for 3 nights after its wearer died." You step closer. The room is so quiet your breath feels like thunder. And then it happens. The robe flutters, not from wind, from sound. A tremor low and mournful rises from the cloth and moves through the air like smoke. It brushes your chest, not harshly, but heavy like memory. Your guide stiffens behind you. "We should go." You nod, but the robe sings again. Higher this time, a new tone, not sad, angry. The abbot's eyes widen. "Someone in your group has spilled blood on sacred ground," he says softly. You glance at your guide. They won't meet your gaze. You leave in silence the echo of the robe's voice, vibrating in your ribs like a struck drum. Outside, even the wind is still. Later, as you make camp near a dry stream bed, your camel refuses to come near your guide. It circles the fire 3 times and lies down facing away from them. The air smells of saffron and dust. You lie awake trying to remember the notes from the robe, the pattern, the feeling, but already it fades. You dream of monks walking in single file across a snowy plain. Their robes ripple, and each footstep releases a chime, until the last one stops walking and his robe screams. You try not to think about the sound. But sound has memory, and memory has legs. It follows you as you travel silent but persistent, like a merchant who never stops walking. And now you come to the story people whisper when the road grows long and sleep grows rare, the eternal merchant. You meet him, or rather, you almost do outside a lonely well east of Anxi. At first he looks like any other trader, short gray beard, sun-creased eyes, robes, clean but road-worn. His cart is tidy, too tidy. Every jar, scroll, and cloth folded perfectly, nothing askew. His tent is already set, his fire already crackling, but no camels, and no companions. Your guide tenses the moment they spot him. They don't dismount. They don't wave. They simply say, "We move on. Now." But you pause, because the man, if he's a man, raises his hand and nods in greeting. Polite, calm, and somehow familiar. His eyes catch yours, and for a moment you feel as if he's not seeing you, but remembering you, like he's flipping through an internal ledger and confirming that yes, you were due to arrive. Then he smiles. It's not cruel, not kind either, just expected. You leave. You don't wave back. You ride, but he stays. And when you glance over your shoulder, 3 dunes later, his camp is gone. Not broken down. Gone, as if it never was. You try to laugh it off. Another desert hallucination maybe, but that night at the next watering hole, he's there again. Same cart, same tent, same expression. Only this time he's sitting, waiting. Your guide refuses to enter the camp. We've walked into his loop, they whisper. He moves with the memory of the road, not the dust. You eat in silence. The fire crackles strangely. No pop, no hiss. Just a dry rhythm like breathing in patterns. You don't speak to the merchant, but you watch, and he watches back. Later when you sleep, you dream of buying something from him. You don't know what. A glass vial? A clock? A single folded letter? Whatever it is, you pay in something you don't recognize. A memory, a promise, a piece of yourself. You wake clutching your hand as if something was just placed in it, but there's nothing there. The road the next morning seems different, less dusty, sharper somehow, like it's been freshly drawn. The camel paths, too precise, the rock formations repeating every few miles. You ask your guide if they've noticed. They don't answer. That's when you see him again riding, this time just ahead. Same robes, same posture. And beside you, someone gasps, because the merchant is behind you too. Two of him, both riding, both silent, both with the same calm, unreadable expression. You blink. One disappears, then the other. But your heart doesn't slow. You ride for hours, checking the horizon like a superstition. The legend is old. Some say he was once a man who sold maps of the future. Others say he traded names for protection, or that he made one perfect deal, an unbreakable one, and now must walk the road forever, with no buyer, no seller, just the price. He never speaks first. He never sets up camp where others already sit. He never asks. But he always appears when someone is lost spiritually, emotionally, physically. And if you speak to him, if you even thank him, the road remembers. Some traders say they've seen him twice in the same night, once ahead, once behind, once in a dream, and once in waking. They all describe his cart the same way: organized, eternal, impossible. Once a man swore he bought water from the eternal merchant during a sandstorm, drank it, survived, then found the same jug in his pack 6 weeks later full again. He never drank from it a second time. You reach the edge of the Taklamakan's southern lip by week's end. The merchant hasn't appeared again, but you find a single glass bead on your saddle one morning. You didn't put it there. You show it to your guide. They nod. You walked his road, they say. Then add almost too quietly to hear. Now see if it lets you leave. You've long since stopped expecting the desert to be consistent. But now it turns strange in ways that feel deliberate. Less like a landscape and more like a creature. One that breathes, one that remembers. And somewhere ahead, it exhales heat in the dead of night, from places long thought dead. You arrive at the edge of a forgotten pagoda, not ruined, buried. Only the top finial peeks out of the sand, its copper tip green with age, yet warm to the touch. Odd considering the sun set hours ago. Your guide doesn't want to stop, but your camel kneels here unasked, as if it's tired in a way that's not just physical. The dunes around you are unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insect calls, just the soft hiss of sand shifting over something large and unmoving beneath. The pagoda breathes. That's the story anyway. They say these ancient structures, once towering, once full of bells and incense, were swallowed whole by the sand when the desert expanded during a monsoon century. Monks refused to abandon them. Some say they were meditating when the dunes came. Others claim they chose to go under. You feel the warmth rising through your boots as you circle what little shows above ground. The sand is dry, but it smells faintly of copper old wood and jasmine. You press your palm to the finial. It pulses. Not with heat exactly, with rhythm, like breath. Your guide watches from a distance, muttering prayers you don't recognize. That night, you make camp nearby. You don't mean to. The camels refuse to move on. They lie flat, twitching in their sleep. The sky is sharp with stars, but the ground beneath you feels full, as if someone else is still living there under the dunes. You dream vividly, not fragments, whole scenes. In one, you walk barefoot through red halls lined with bronze mirrors. In another, you're sitting in meditation, but your reflection in the mirror is not you. It's older, wiser, smiling. In the final dream, you lie beneath the earth, not buried, sheltered, listening. The breathing is slow, steady, safe. You wake at dawn, heartbeat still matching the rhythm from the dream. Your guide's already up watching you. You dream, they say. You nod. They just sigh. It always knows who can hear it. You pack in silence. But the moment you try to lead your camel away, it balks. You coax it, whisper, promise. Still, it won't move. Only when you turn back to the finial and say, "Thank you," does the camel rise. You're not sure why you said it. You're even less sure why it worked. As you ride away, your guide tells you a final story, softly like a riddle. There were once 32 pagodas in this region, they say. Monasteries, libraries, retreats, all buried within one generation. People assumed it was war, sandstorms, earthquakes, but some maps from the era show no damage, just silence and heat. A few traders believe the monks didn't vanish. They changed, that they built downward, that what was once above is now below, and that in the deepest chambers something still sits cross-legged, unmoving, awake, breathing, waiting. When you finally glance back over your shoulder, the finial has disappeared, swallowed completely by the shifting sands. But the warmth stays in your bones for miles, as if the pagoda still remembers you, as if you're now one of the few it breathed on and let go. You've stopped trying to control the path. At this point, it seems to choose you. The road leads you not where it's easiest, but where the next question waits. And this one doesn't speak. It counts, but not forward, not like clocks are supposed to. You find the clock by accident. It sits beneath a silk canopy at a half-forgotten oasis where the wind is hot and the palms droop as if listening to something only they can hear. Traders rest here, but not for long. No one speaks loudly. There, under woven shade, a small structure leans quietly. Brick and wood. Faded blue paint flaking from its sides. A rusted bell. A door carved with cloud patterns. And inside, a single timepiece, its face cracked but intact, suspended in the center of the room by a web of silver chains. It ticks. Backwards. You stare. The hands move in steady reverse, each tick precise, unfaltering. Seconds dissolve into minutes, minutes into hours, but all in reverse. You check your own pocket sundial. Normal. The sun confirms it. The desert remains indifferent. Your guide won't come inside. This place is for forgetting, they say, from the threshold, for erasing. You sit before the clock and listen. Tick, tick, tick. The sound is strangely soothing, like it's undoing the pressure of the world outside, like it's unwinding the tight coil of the present. And then the dreams begin, not later while sleeping. Now, awake, you see yourself, earlier, at yesterday's well, your hand grazing the rim before your camel drinks, then further back. You're speaking to the eternal merchant, except you never did. But here in the clock's reflection, you do. You hand him something. He nods. You nod. Then everything dissolves again. You blink. You're still in the clock room. Your guide calls your name sharply from outside. You stumble out shaken. That night over weak stew and sour bread, your guide tells you about the reversal shrine. It appears only to those who've asked a question they regret. Inside, the clock ticks backward for just one traveler at a time. Some believe it can erase time itself, reset a single thread in the web of your journey. A word you wish you hadn't said, a name you should never have spoken, a door you shouldn't have opened. But the price is uncertain. One scholar who entered the shrine came out smiling, swearing he'd never had a sister, though everyone else remembered her clearly. Another came out and refused to speak again, afraid that a single word might undo his second chance. Your guide offers one last tale. A man entered the shrine after losing his son in the desert. He begged to go back to warn himself to change the path. He left the clock room the next morning, pale and hollow-eyed. He walked east for weeks before realizing something was wrong. Everyone remembered him, but no one remembered his son, and neither did he. You stare at the flames until they blur. You didn't make a wish in the clock room. But something inside you wonders, did you? You sleep uneasily that night, with the ticking sound echoing in your skull. Backwards. Always backwards. You wake before sunrise with a question that doesn't belong to you on the edge of your tongue. You whisper it aloud. It vanishes before you hear it. But the clock miles behind you now ticks one beat louder in your memory. And maybe, just maybe something in you ticks with it. By now it's no longer clear whether you're following a road or being followed by it. The desert feels like a library without labels, filled with half-legible entries and living footnotes. And now, as you cross into Samarkand's shadow, the map you carry begins to argue with itself. It happens during a routine rest. You're in a well-traveled market square, safe beneath silk awnings and the distant call of minarets. Samarkand is calm today, dusty but calm. You unroll your scroll map to plan the next leg. The path you need is simple, familiar. But the ink disagrees. The lines have shifted. You check again, rubbing your eyes. A trade route that once cut west now snakes north. A city once labeled Yanchi is missing. In its place, a winding symbol that looks more like a question mark than a word. Your guide leans over, frowns. This map was true, they say. When you don't answer, you don't need to. Because you realize this isn't the first time. Back in Dunhuang, the distance between two rest stops felt longer than it should have. In the caves, a trail marker pointed to a mountain that wasn't there. You blamed memory, heat, exhaustion, but it's the map. It's been changing, and not randomly, only during the full moon. You test your theory over the next 2 days, comparing it to archived charts in the local scriptorium. The changes aren't chaotic, they're directional, suggestive. Someone or something is rewriting the journey. You ask the mapkeeper, a stooped woman with eyes like candle soot, if anyone's ever reported this before. She nods once. Every few years, she murmurs, a traveler comes in with ink that won't sit still. She unrolls a scroll from a glass case. The lines on it writhe gently, like sleeping serpents. This one changed its own borders 7 times, then stopped. Its owner never returned. That night, you seal your map inside a lacquered case. It doesn't matter. By morning, a new route appears, one that cuts across empty desert, avoiding the main caravans. A dotted line, faint but unmistakable. You didn't draw it. Your guide refuses to follow it. It's not for us, they say. It's for you. You ask what happens if you disobey a map that writes itself. They reply, depends who's holding the pen. Legends speak of the ink map, a tool supposedly gifted to a lost prince centuries ago. Not drawn by human hands, but revealed slowly, night by night, as the stars aligned. It never lied, but it never explained either. Some say the ink isn't made from dye or soot, but from the black resin of memory itself. Melted thoughts, hardened dreams. Others say it's the desert's own blood leaked into parchment and desperate to guide anyone who dares to listen. You ride out the next morning and take the new path. It's not easier. The dunes are sharper here, the wind less forgiving. But something about it feels deliberate. You pass no one, until just before twilight, when you see a figure on a distant ridge, kneeling unrolling a scroll of their own. They look up, and for a moment you think they might be holding your face. But no, just another traveler. Another question. Another map. Yours flutters in the wind. A new mark appears as you watch a small curl at the path's end. Not a destination. A signature. You trace it with your finger. The ink is wet, still drying, still alive. You've followed roads carved by wind footsteps, memory and ink. But now you reach the place beyond all markings. The maps fall silent. The dunes offer no signs. And the road, if it ever truly existed, now begins to forget you step by quiet step. They warned you about it back in the beginning. Not with signs or words, just a glance, a phrase whispered beneath someone else's sentence. Be careful not to cross into the heart road. You thought it was metaphor. But now you know. The path is narrower here, not in space, but in presence. Each step forward feels heavier, and yet each footprint behind fades faster than it should. The sand swallows them too quickly. Your camel's hooves leave no trace within seconds. Even your own breath feels as if it's being erased. You glance behind you. Nothing. No trail. No cart ruts. Not even the scuff of fabric on rock. You're walking the road that vanishes behind you. And it's not magic. It's memory. Your guide stops at the edge of a low dune. This is as far as I go. You nod. You knew. Some say the road here doesn't just forget footsteps, they murmur. It forgets the people who made them. You ask if that's a curse. They say no. It's a kindness if you let it be. You move forward alone. The world goes quieter with each step. No wind. No birds. No insects. Even your heartbeat sounds like it's echoing from someone else's chest. There's a story half whispered in markets and libraries about a traveler who walked this path to forget a betrayal so deep it broke his name. He came back with new eyes, a new gait, no memories, and a smile. Another tale tells of a woman who entered carrying a book of prophecies. She came out empty-handed, but humming a tune no one else knew, and her voice healed the sick for years afterward. But most who walk this road don't return, not because they die, because they choose not to. The land here is different, shimmering, weightless. You walk for hours, maybe days, and feel neither thirst nor fatigue. The sun never quite rises or sets. Time folds softly around you like cloth in a drawer, untouched for years. You stop at what seems like a crossroads, though no roads are visible. Only an impression. A curve in the dunes. A dark stone placed purposefully beside a thornless bush. You sit, you breathe. And the world forgets you. Not all at once. First, the weight on your shoulders lifts. Not physical, emotional. That argument from last year gone. The memory of a wrong word spoken in anger dissolves. Then the smaller things, your favorite food, the exact color of your childhood home, the way a loved one said your name. You feel lighter, but not hollow. Just simpler. In this moment, the silence isn't empty. It's full. The way a night sky is full. The way closed eyes still hold color. You could stay here. You almost do. But something faint and familiar tugs at the edge of you. A name. Yours or someone else's. You turn around, and the road is back. Just enough to guide you. No footprints. No markers. But the memory of a path now willing to remember you again. Just enough. You walk back. Not the same. Not entirely sure what was lost. But feeling for the first time like nothing needs to be found. Imagine a frozen plain, so wide it swallows sound, and the wind so dry it seems to steal memories from your skin. Yet somewhere beneath thick furs and lacquered wooden boxes, something sweet hides, something tender, sticky, and still faintly warm. Why, you might ask, would anyone risk frostbite raids or spoilage just to bring dessert across 1,000 miles of winter? The honey cakes don't look like much when you first spot them. Small, unglamorous, perhaps slightly crushed from the saddle's press. But if you break one open, the scent that rises is layered pine honey harvested from high mountain hives, hints of dried rose petals folded into the dough, and a memory of cinnamon, though no one quite agrees where that spice was sourced. To the steppe queens who awaited these tiny golden gifts, they were more than food. They were prophecy. You ride with a small caravan, no more than 20 animals, through the Altai foothills. The days are short, the nights bitter. You keep the cakes in a lacquered chest, nestled between bolts of coarse wool and goat cheese skins. The merchant who guards them sleeps with one eye open. He says the queens up north have dreams shaped by scent, and the flavor of the first cake they eat each spring determines whether trade will flow or die. Some call it superstition. Others know better. One queen once turned back an entire tribute party because their honey was too polite. Another demanded that the cakes smell like a fire she remembered as a girl. The chefs obliged and the treaty held. Historians still argue whether these cakes were simply diplomatic tokens, or if the baking itself carried secret signals. A cracked glaze could mean yes, a burn at the edge, no. One cake cut wrong may have cost a fortress, but no one could prove it, not even when 5 envoys disappeared after serving their desserts too early. The recipes were guarded like gold, passed down not by scroll but by song, whispered only when the oven was hot and the room sealed. Some sang only in the presence of fresh snow. Others refused to sing until their fingers were stained with saffron and crushed hawthorn. It wasn't cooking. It was ritual. On one occasion, a foreign trader attempted to replicate the cakes without permission. He paid a local boy to spy in the kitchen. The cakes arrived on time, but their glaze cracked like eggshell. The queen took one bite, closed her eyes, and turned the boy's village into a ghost town by winter. You think of this as your camel breathes a warm cloud into the frozen dawn. Your merchant companion unwraps one cake not for the queens, but for himself. A test, he says. If it tastes like home, we live. He takes a bite, then nods content. Still dreaming of spring. You wonder who taught him to bake. He never says. His hands bear burns in 3 places. A clue, perhaps, to the flames he served before. And then one night, a storm comes, snow-thick as wool visibility down to your gloved fingertips. You camp in silence. The wind howls like a starving animal. But from the merchant's tent, a smell seeps out honey rose cinnamon and something sharper. Not quite mint, not quite grief. The next morning, the cakes are gone. No footprints lead away from the tent. Just a slight imprint in the snow where someone kneeled. A visitor or a vision. The queens will still expect their tribute. You press on, unsure whether you're carrying dessert or diplomacy sweets or sentences. The cakes may be gone, but the smell lingers on your coat. And the merchant? He walks ahead, now silent, as if the storm taught him a new kind of caution. Later in the frost-ringed capital, the queen receives the story of the storm and the vanished cakes. She listens, expression unreadable. Then she orders her cooks to prepare a single replacement, but not from the recipe. From the memory of the scent on your coat, they press your sleeves to their faces, murmur ingredients, heat honey over low flame. No one speaks. And when the cake is ready, the queen eats with closed eyes. She smiles. Good, she says, it tastes like fear, but honest fear. And the gates open once more. The scent has barely faded from your coat when a new puzzle takes shape, this time tucked not in silken wrappings, but in wheels of cheese. Golden, pungent, and suspiciously heavy. Some caravans carry treasure in the obvious ways, scrolls tucked into boots, coins sewn beneath saddles. But others take a more culinary approach. The wheel of goat cheese your merchant companion hoists into your hands feels unusually dense. It doesn't bounce like it should. It doesn't smell quite right either, more metal than dairy. You crack it open slightly, and there it is, a fine, grainy shimmer of gold dust packed deep inside the rind. Smuggling, yes, but smuggling through the senses. Gold dust hidden in cheese rinds, was it genius or just desperate creativity? Historians still argue whether it was a widespread practice or merely the fantasy of tax evaders who liked their tales creamy and criminal. But records from certain toll stations hint at something suspicious, entire inventories of cheese gone missing during hot spells or confiscated because the taste was too luxurious. One suspicious official wrote in a margin, "There is no goat in this." But there was gold. Tax checkpoints dotted the ancient roads, like pimples on a teenage empire, little posts with big appetites. Officially, their job was to inspect and charge. Unofficially, they pilfered and gossiped. Word traveled fast about the merchants who passed through with wheels of cheese too valuable to eat. The trick, you're told, is to pack the gold into the outer edge. No one inspects the crust after all. The inner wheel is safe to taste. The outer is retirement. Not all cheese survived the journey. Heat was a curse. Spoiled rinds would crack, spilling fortune onto the trail. Once a fox was found gnawing at a golden puddle, its muzzle glittering like royalty. Another time, a merchant wept for hours after discovering mold had fused the gold into a bitter paste. "It's cursed now," he murmured, and buried it beside a fig tree. Some weren't so lucky. One checkpoint in the southern hills discovered an entire cartload of cheese that rang when tapped. The merchant insisted it was a new kind of preservation. Mineral-rich caves, he swore. They weren't impressed. The cheese was confiscated, the merchant fined, and curiously, the toll collector opened a new house 2 months later with silver ceilings. Yet the practice continued. Why? Because it worked most of the time. Cheese was a comfort, a universal good, and ironically a food too humble to be suspicious. What better disguise for gold than something so mundane it stinks? You pass through one of these old checkpoints now, a wooden post half buried in snow. Its flags long faded, its inspection tables abandoned. There's nothing left but a few rusted scales and the ghost of bureaucracy. Your merchant taps one with his stick. "Too light," he says. They wouldn't have noticed. Later around, a fire, he tells you of a legend, a lost caravan whose every cheese wheel carried gold enough to ransom a city. But they miscalculated the temperature. Every rind melted by the third pass. Their fortune sank into the sand and hardened again by dawn. No one ever found it, though occasional wanderers swear the dunes still smell faintly of brie. The smell, again the smell. It's always the first sign. Whether it's honey or cheese, fortune always seems to begin with scent. One night in a mountain pass, a bandit approaches your fire, not with a threat, but with a wheel. "You lost this," he says with a grin. He tosses it into your lap. The merchant blinks. "Where did you get that?" "From the goat," the bandit shrugs. "She smelled like money. The cheese is intact, its rind firm, its scent. Suspiciously metallic." The bandit walks away and you never see him again. Weeks later, when you finally reach the trading court, the merchant delivers the wheel as tribute. The local chancellor cracks it open. Gold dust spills like pollen. He smiles without joy. "We'll pretend we never saw it," he says, tucking the wheel beneath his cloak. Your merchant nods. That's what cheese is for, and somehow you believe him. The trail shifts again, this time away from gold and food and into something stranger. You smell it before you see it, smoke sweetened by lavender and old ink. Not all scrolls are meant to be read. Some are meant to be inhaled. Your merchant unwraps a parcel with uncharacteristic reverence. Inside a roll of silk, impossibly delicate, bearing no words. No drawings either. Just faint stains and deep reds, pale yellows and odd greens. He tells you they're prayers, but not in the way you expect. The scrolls don't speak to the eyes. They speak to the nose. He lifts a corner and invites you to breathe in. You hesitate, then take a slow breath. There's clove and something like pine resin. And beneath it, a note of burnt sandalwood, faint like an old song sung through a locked door. Your mind doesn't light up exactly. It softens. Your thoughts loosen like knots. Portable prayers and scented scrolls were once common along certain routes in Central Asia and parts of ancient Persia. Their logic was simple. The divine doesn't always listen to words, but smells linger even in thin air. The idea, historians say, came from temple rituals, where incense smoke carried intentions upward. Why not let travelers carry that same message? So instead of ink, they used crushed herbs, dried flower petals, rare woods turned to powder. These were mixed into oils and pressed into the silk in patterns no eye could follow, but the soul might. You see one now, a spiral of orange oil that smells like dried mangoes and myrrh. It's meant to be used at twilight. Another scroll is meant for fear. Another for forgiveness. Each time you inhale one, a different image stirs in your memory, some yours, some not. Your merchant warns, don't breathe too deeply. Dreams may follow. Not everyone appreciated these scent scrolls. Some clerics condemned them as trickery. Others feared they blurred the line between faith and indulgence. Prayer, one scholar wrote, should not smell like pleasure. But others disagreed. After all, wasn't incense always part of worship? Was this not merely a more portable temple? There were even attempts to create scent script, where the sequence of smells was the meaning. Pine, then smoke, then clove. That might mean safe journey. Reverse danger ahead. Historians still argue whether such combinations ever formed a real language or whether merchants just liked the idea. You're given your own scroll on the third week of travel. A gift from a passing monk exchanged for dried apricots. It smells like saffron and sadness. You tuck it into your sleeve. One night, your merchant stirs in his sleep, whispering names you don't know. You unwrap his scroll and catch a scent of salt and basil. The wind changes. he falls quiet. Some say the scrolls could change their scent, depending on who held them. A trick of oil and heat, or something more. One scroll was said to smell like rain to the lonely and firewood to the lost. You think of that now, as you reach the next outpost, a quiet shrine carved into rock where no one speaks above a whisper. You offer your scroll there as travelers before you have. A flame catches beneath it, and the smoke rises in curls. The scent changes one last time. This time it smells like home, though you don't know which one. And the priest? He only smiles and says, heard loud and clear. You leave with lighter steps, and for the first time in days, you sleep without dreams. The next gift of the road glitters not with wealth, but with wonder. Not all cargo was meant for humans. Some was meant for gods no one had ever seen. You first hear the beads before you see them soft clinks in a wooden box, like raindrops trapped inside a drawer. Your merchant opens the lid, briefly revealing a tangled nest of glass bone and shell. Not for trading, he tells you, not in the usual sense. These beads aren't for people. They're offerings. Glass beads for invisible gods. The belief, he explains, comes from a forested region far to the west, where people whisper to trees and leave food out for shadows. Their merchants dare not sell their shiniest trinkets. They bury them, instead, on purpose. To sell them would offend the spirits who live between the boughs and under the roots. It is said that to sell a bead intended for a god is to invite a wind that never stops a sickness with no name, or worst of all, silence. Not even birdsong. Some merchants ignore these rules, of course. They polish the beads, string them into necklaces, and trade them for salt or wool. But many of those beads are found later discarded on roadsides or shattered inexplicably in sealed boxes. One even melted in the cold. One theory is that the beads weren't just symbols. They were invitations, gifts to deities of place meant to mark safe passage. Lose the bead, and perhaps you lose your welcome. Your merchant never sells his. He leaves them in sacred spots along the road, tucked into tree knots, buried under cairns, once even wedged between the hooves of a statue. He says nothing while he does it. You ask what the gods do with them. Watch, he says. Watch what he only shrugs. You. Historians still debate whether these invisible gods were local spirits, deified ancestors, or metaphors for seasonal luck. Some early scribes dismissed the practice entirely, calling it childish, a glittering superstition, but others took it seriously. One tax record notes an entire caravan exempted from tolls because their tribute was already accepted elsewhere. No further explanation. There's an old tale of a caravan that tried to sell its bead offerings at a bustling crossroad market. One by one, their animals grew sick. The wind blew backwards. A child traveling with them began to speak in verses and then stopped speaking altogether. They buried the rest of their beads by the next sunrise. The wind turned again. The child spoke one word: thanks. You've begun noticing small piles of beads left by other travelers, sometimes tucked in moss, sometimes balanced in hollows. One night, in a dense wood, you pass a patch of glowing mushrooms. There's a single bead resting atop the tallest cap, blue glass pierced with a red swirl. It pulses faintly in the moonlight, though no one touches it. That night, your fire burns a little warmer. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the gods, invisible as they are, prefer gifts with shine and silence. Later, you find yourself reaching into your own pouch. Just once. Just one bead. You place it gently beneath a bent tree brush off the dirt and walk away without looking back. The next morning, a bird sings a melody you've never heard before. Your merchant looks up and smiles. "Safe crossing," he says, and the road opens like a welcome. The next item isn't given, but leaked powder, fine as sand pigment, bright as sea glass, and a warning whispered with every breath: don't inhale. It begins with a cough. Not yours. One of the apprentices trailing behind your caravan. He'd been fiddling with the cargo again, thinking he could sneak a peek at the sky powder, as some of the traders call it. You turn just in time to see a fine violet plume burst into the air, and the boy stumble backward, eyes wide, muttering something about birds flying sideways. He won't stop laughing for the next 2 hours. You've just met the indigo dye that drove men mad. It's no ordinary pigment. Mined in minute quantities from a mineral called kavira stone and processed through a 7-stage ritual involving steam goat urine and moonlight. This indigo powder was prized across empires. A single ounce properly sealed could purchase a camel. A palmful, if spilled, might empty a tent in seconds. The merchants handling it wear gloves, and if they're rich enough, masks. Your own merchant keeps the jar buried beneath a layer of onion skins inside a ceramic box, inside another box that smells faintly of pine and wet ash. Keeps the madness asleep, he explains. Then adds, usually. Historians still argue about whether the hallucinations were caused by the dye itself or the mold that grew on poorly stored batches. One theory blames exposure during grinding, especially in dry climates where the powder floats like ghost flour. Another theory insists the hallucinations were spiritual. The dye opened a vein of vision, linking the user to the realm of pattern and sound. The symptoms weren't always terrifying. Some saw music. Others claimed to glimpse lost relatives braided into the clouds. One painter insisted he met his future son in a bowl of boiled cabbage, then had no children. But many feared the dye more than they loved it. There were stories of dyers forgetting their own names, of artists who tried to paint the sky with it and vanished. In one court, wearing a robe dyed with mad indigo became a fashion statement and a social risk. You could be seen as visionary or unstable. The caravan moves cautiously with this cargo. No sudden jostles, no loud noises, no fire nearby. You're warned never to open the jar during wind. The madness rides the breeze, someone says, and no one laughs. One night, your merchant shares a secret. The dye was once used in spy work. Messages painted invisibly onto cloth would only appear when treated with steam and prayers. The result was temporary, often illegible, and potentially dangerous, but useful in the right hands. He shows you a scarf stitched with what looks like nothing but blue stars. He breathes onto it. The stars shift. They become letters, then names. He folds it quickly. Too much breath, and the names start talking back. You sleep badly that night. Another traveler in your group swears he saw the pigment glow in moonlight, pulsing like a heartbeat. He won't touch it again. Eventually, you trade the last of the indigo powder at a silent hilltop temple, where the monks speak only in color. One accepts the jar with a bow. His eyes are cloudy with age, but he walks with certainty. He dips a finger into the powder, brushes it across the temple door, and suddenly the air smells like thunder and blueberries. He turns to you and says in a voice like snow melting, "Be glad you wore gloves. You never see him again." As the caravan descends toward warmer lands, you find traces of the pigment in odd places. the hem of your robe, the fold of a saddle, a speck on your skin. You wipe it away, but for a brief moment, you feel oddly euphoric, like the road has forgotten its dust. You blink, and everything returns to normal. Mostly. The strangest currencies are never minted. They grow in silence, fall from trees, and smell faintly of snow. Some seeds buy bread, others armies. Your merchant stoops beneath a ragged pine, digs into the dry soil with a hooked stick, and pulls up a clump of old needles and 3 pine cones. Not for warmth, not for fire. He weighs them carefully in his palm, as if counting coins. These, he says, once paid for 200 men. You're not sure if he's exaggerating, but in this caravan, exaggeration tends to come true sooner or later. You're looking at the dried pine cones that paid for mercenaries. It sounds absurd until you remember that currency is never about logic. It's about belief. And once in the snow-choked valleys of the north, belief grew on trees. The pine in question came from a rare alpine species, whose resin, when burned, produced a scent like crushed violets and honeyed tobacco. Used in rituals, it was said to drive out curses, calm storms, and soften the moods of generals. The cones, dried and sealed in beeswax, became prized cargo portable power in a world where power was always on fire. Historians still argue how exactly this pine trade began. Some blame a northern queen who refused gold but demanded the scent that soothed my sleep. Others point to a merchant prince whose soldiers wouldn't march without pine smoke wafting from their tents. The effect wasn't just spiritual. Pine ash mixed with vinegar made an excellent wound dressing, and the cones themselves could be ground into a stimulant tea which mercenaries swore gave them sharper hearing and slower fear. Was it placebo? Possibly, but entire campaigns were funded on pine. At one point, a border skirmish between 2 city-states ended not with swords, but with a bidding war over 5 sacks of cones. The winning side lit theirs immediately. The losing side was later found asleep under enemy banners. You encounter a troop of old guards at a rest station who still carry pine cone tokens on leather strings. For luck, they say. But one admits he once bought a horse with a wax-sealed cone. The horse had no teeth. Still, it walked. Your merchant handles the cones with care. He stores them in a silk pouch lined with sheepskin. Humidity ruins their politics, he mutters. At one checkpoint, an inspector demands to search the cargo. He picks up a cone, sniffs, and goes oddly quiet. He places it down gently and waves the caravan through without another word. His brother, your merchant, whispers, later died in a pine smoke war. Some cones were faked. Cheaper varieties soaked in perfumes molded into shape. But trained noses could always tell. Real pine had a weight, a slow, sticky pull at the back of the throat, like remembering a lie you once told too well. One night, as frost settles like lace over your bedroll, your merchant burns a sliver of cone. The scent rises subtle, but unmistakable. It makes your heart slow down. Your eyes moisten for no reason. A memory of snow you've never walked in settles in your lungs. Still works, he says. The next day you pass through a village where no coins are used, just bark thread and pine. A boy offers to shine your boots for a single seed. His sister braids her hair with the cone's outer scales, for wisdom, she says. Their grandmother uses the ash to mark her doorway, a sign against thieves, or maybe just the cold. You leave one cone there in their hearth basket. You gain nothing by it. But the road ahead seems smoother somehow, and the animals more patient. Perhaps pine cones no longer buy armies. But once they did, and the ghosts of those purchases still walk the trails. You've seen wealth disguised as cheese madness hidden in pigment and prayers woven from scent, but tonight your cargo begins to pray back. And it's on fire. The storm creeps in without ceremony. One moment, you're adjusting saddle straps beneath a quiet dusk. The next clouds split open like scrolls, hurling silver rain, and wind sharp enough to hum through wool. Lightning flashes far too close for comfort. The merchant ahead of you panics not for the animals, not for the route, but for a bundle strapped beneath one camel's belly. He rushes toward it, slicing the ropes with shaking hands. The bundle falls with a wet thunk, a wooden chest carved with spirals and sealed with melted beeswax. Inside are the miniature altars. Small, delicate, and oddly warm, they're barely the size of a traveler's palm. Tiny shrines with tiny gods packed into hollowed-out soapstone horn or folded tin. Most look inert, but one begins to smoke. Miniature altars in camel saddles, an old custom, still practiced by traders, too long on the road and too far from temples. Some were religious in the traditional sense. Others more personal. A shrine to an ancestor. A prayer for protection. A curse against bandits. It depended entirely on who packed them. But during storms, they became unpredictable. Static your merchant mutters, trying to blow out the flickering wick of one. Or temper. Historians still argue whether these pocket shrines were ever meant to survive storms, or if the fire they summoned was part of the ritual. One recorded case mentions a caravan losing half its cargo when an altar flared up near bundles of dried flax. Yet the survivors swore they were spared by the flame's favor. Another tale tells of a shrine glowing faintly for hours before an avalanche. Those who followed its light made it through. Those who didn't were never found. The one smoldering in your hands now has a faint coppery smell, the kind of scent usually found in old coins or dried blood. You hesitate, then bury it under wet cloth and sand. It hisses once, then goes silent. Later, when the storm passes, you investigate the other altars. Each is different. One bears a tiny carving of a weeping ox. Another contains a pinch of sand from a distant battlefield. One inexplicably holds a single brass tooth. Not gods, your merchant finally says. Memories. That's why they burn. Some are given as birth gifts, others as apologies. A few are created in mourning, with instructions to carry them across exactly 7 deserts before they're opened. What happens if you open them early? No one seems to agree. But the word ash comes up more than once. You meet a woman in a hilltop inn who collects these shrines. She carries 12. One for each of her lost sons, she says. She's never opened any. They're not for me, she smiles. One evening, your merchant hands you one. It's smooth blackened wood, carved with 7 pointed stars. He says nothing. But when you hold it, your hand feels warmer. You tuck it into your coat. Days later, in the dead of night, you wake to the scent of pepper and rain. You check the shrine. No flame, no smoke, but the stars on its surface have shifted, just slightly. You say nothing, and neither does the merchant. In this part of the world, no one questions what burns if it keeps the path lit. The desert holds its breath in the cool hours before sunrise, and from somewhere inside a tightly sealed jar comes a sound you can't quite believe is real. It starts faintly, like a memory misplaced in a dream. A chirp, then another. Your camel halts mid-step, ears twitching. Your merchant freezes. He reaches for a clay jar tucked in woven reeds, no larger than a melon sealed with beeswax and wrapped in cloth. He lifts it to his ear. Inside birdsong. Not echo, not whistle. Song. Welcome to the most fragile and most expensive cargo in the caravan birdsong bottles for the desert kings. They weren't always for royalty, but they rarely survived long enough to reach anyone else. Each bottle held a melody, a moment of wilderness, a promise of sound where silence ruled. These were not symbolic containers. They quite literally trapped the chirps, trills, and rhythmic calls of specific birds. How, that's the mystery. Some claim it was done with vibration-sensitive wax and copper coils. Others swear the jars were lined with powdered obsidian and owl feathers, creating a kind of sonic echo chamber. And then there's the third theory, that the birds gave up their song willingly. You open one. The sound that spills out is unmistakable, a sunfinch, trill-heavy territorial. It shouldn't be here. It shouldn't exist like this. But there it is. Real. Short. Then gone. Your merchant says little, but you learn that in some palaces kings used these jars like perfumes, opening them only when moods soured or meetings dragged. One jar might reset an entire negotiation. Another might spark tears at a funeral. One emperor was buried with 5 each labeled with a season. At his tomb, the air is still said to change tone every solstice. Historians argue whether the sounds were natural, technological, or magical. Some suspect ventriloquism. Others blame rare acoustic minerals. A few monks in the Eastern libraries describe sonic trapping as a lost ritual taught by sky priests. But none agree. The jars, however, remain. Each region preferred different birds. Mountain kings wanted lark songs. River queens desired heron calls. One desert prince insisted on owl hoots at dawn, claiming it frightened off bad dreams. You watch as your merchant packs the jars with reverent precision. No shaking, no clinking, no humming near them. Sound contamination, he warns, makes the next opening unpredictable. He tells you about a rival merchant who tried to fake a bottle by whistling into a jar, sealing it quickly, and selling it to a warlord. When opened, it screamed. The warlord banished him to a tower where birds were forbidden. You find yourself drawn to one particular jar, smaller than the rest, etched with leaves, tied with green string. You open it. A single whistle escapes, sharp and sweet, like something calling from far beyond the dunes. Your horse immediately lifts its head. The merchant raises an eyebrow. "Storm bird," he murmurs. "They don't sing unless rain is coming." That night clouds gather over the sand, just enough for one cool hour. You never find that jar again. It disappears sometime before sunrise, along with the chirping echo that haunts your dreams for days. Later, in a market far from any desert, an old woman sells you a jar that hums. Not birdsong, not speech, just hums. You ask her what's inside. She grins. The first song the world ever heard. You don't open it. Not yet. The next item never speaks, but it knows the roads better than your map does. Not because it remembers, but because someone once bled secrets into its seams. The coat is soft, too soft. A cloak of fox fur so well tanned and pressed you'd think it was meant for a prince. But the merchant doesn't wear it. He folds it in layers, always with the same precision, always tail end tucked under. One evening, he hands it to you with a grunt. Put it on. Not for warmth. Just trust it. You obey. The collar prickles your neck. The tails brush your legs. The lining feels oddly thick, like more than fur, more than leather. As you shift, you notice it, a thin line of red stitching. Then another. Then a pattern coiling in the seams. It's not just a cloak. It's a code. Furs lined with forbidden maps. In an age when roads were taxed, travel was spied on, and rebellion flared like wildfire, smuggling a map was treason. but fashion went unnoticed, especially among the rich and fur-draped. Hidden in the linings of cloaks, hoods, and muffs, detailed routes to secret fortresses, bandit hideaways, or escape tunnels crossed continents in silent defiance. Some tailors did it for coin, others did it for cause. Historians still debate whether the so-called fur cartographers were a true resistance or just eccentric smugglers with needle skills. One recovered cloak was said to show not just roads, but coded times to use them. Another reportedly pulsed warm near hidden borders, though skeptics blamed sewn-in hot stones. Your merchant doesn't say how he got his cloak, but you notice how certain guards let him pass without question, how he never seems lost, and how when pressed, he can fold the cloak in such a way that only one symbol remains visible, a tree with 7 roots. You later learn this was the seal of a rebel queen whose army vanished 2 winters ago. No bodies, no battle, just silence. Some say they still march guided by fox fur and memory. One night, in a tavern, heavy with salt and secrets, you meet an old woman sewing by lantern light. Her thread is gray, her fingers fast. She asks to see your cloak. Just a glance. You hesitate, then hand it over. She presses it to her cheek, hums once, and says, "Ah, the coast road. It always starts with bloodroot." She returns it, carefully adding 1 extra stitch near the hem. That should get you past the copper mines, if they're still there. The next morning, you find a pebble in your boot, and a sudden change in the trail, a detour through fog too sharp to be accidental. The cloak warms slightly, just once. You never speak of it again. Later, the merchant confesses one tailor was executed for hiding escape routes in squirrel fur mittens. His code was so elegant, it resembled mere decoration. A prince wore his own way out of a siege and never knew it. You look down at your cloak. The threads feel alive now. Not moving exactly, but aware. Like they're waiting for the right moment to show you something. You sleep with it wrapped around you, and dream of roads that twist in familiar ways toward places you haven't been but somehow recognize. By now, you've smelled memories, worn maps, and heard birdsong sealed in clay. But this next cargo is alive, restless, reactive, and brewed for a dawn that doesn't come twice. The monastery sits quiet on the slope, half carved into the rock, like it's been praying for so long, the mountain decided to let it in. You're not here for worship, you're here for tea. But not just any tea. This one changes color at sunrise. You follow the merchant through a cold passage where lanterns flicker with oil that smells like apricots and dust. At the end, a single monk waits bald and blank-eyed, seated beside a heavy bronze box. He says nothing as the merchant shows his token, a piece of shell inked with a flower that doesn't exist anymore. The monk opens the box. Inside, tightly sealed clay pouches, each marked with a different swirl. No words, just shades of green, blue, red. The merchant selects one bows and places a handful of copper coins, plus something you don't recognize, a sliver of pale bark wrapped in silk. The monk bows in return. No transaction was spoken aloud. Later, as campfire coals fade, the merchant prepares the brew with absolute silence. A pinch of the dried leaves, water just off boil, a cup carved from stone. As the tea steeps, it shimmers pale green. You're told to wait. When the sun breaches the ridge, the tea blushes rose gold. Tea that changes color at sunrise, was it magic chemistry? Or just the power of perfect timing? Historians still debate the recipe. Some believe it involved crushed chrysanthemum petals and powdered amethyst. Others claim the monks bred a special strain of mountain mint that only bloomed at twilight, creating a compound that refracted light differently depending on its angle. Still, others suspect the tea was simply enchanted, though enchantment was often just another word for science we didn't write down. The color isn't the only strange thing. Those who drink it at the exact moment it shifts claim to see visions, the future, the past, their truest self. One prince saw an invasion before it began. A poet glimpsed a version of herself who'd never left home. A cook saw a recipe so perfect he wept for a week. Your merchant sips and says nothing. You drink too. You don't see anything at first, just warmth and a flavor that reminds you of sunlit stone. But a minute later, you remember a road you've never walked, a river whose name you suddenly know, a voice you haven't heard yet but already miss. Then it fades. The monks only allow the tea to be brewed once per pouch. The moment is the magic. If you miss it, you miss everything. Some fakes exist, of course. A dye that turns with heat, a flower extract that mimics the color. But the real tea, only brewed in 5 monasteries, only traded through silence and tokens, and never more than once a year. You ask the merchant if he has more. No, he says, that was this year's moment, and the box is gone. You wonder how many lives have hinged on that shift of color, on whether someone woke up on time, on whether clouds blocked the sun, on whether a merchant remembered to carry water pure enough. The next morning, your cup is empty, but you hold it to the rising light anyway, just to see. Some weapons are sharpened in silence, others disguised in plain sight. But tonight, beneath firelight and laughter, a blade whispers its true purpose, not in steel, but in time. It begins as a joke. One of the caravan guards pulls out a dagger, waves it theatrically, and says, "Best calendar I ever owned." You chuckle until he flips the blade. Etched along the hilt, notches, tiny symbols, moons, grains. Too regular to be ornamental, too thoughtful to be random. Your merchant leans in, frowns, and quietly asks, whose dates are those? Because some daggers weren't forged for killing. They were carved for remembering. Dagger hilt calendars for secret meetings, an old trick of rebel scholars, and those with too many promises to keep. The patterns on the grip held codes, lunar phases, sacred days, rendezvous markers. In a world where parchment was too risky and memory too mortal, steel became the schedule. The hilt is wrapped in leather, but underneath faint carvings spiral upward like vines, each twist signifying a week, dots for days, triangles for events, occasionally a hollow for don't. Historians argue about their origin. Some say desert astronomers made the first hilt calendars to track star risings. Others claim a secret love affair between a noble and a monk required the invention, when to meet, when not to meet, when to run. A more poetic theory says they began as blades that guarded time. The dagger you're handed is warm from a boot holster. The dates on it seem recent. You ask if they still mean anything. The guard shrugs. If the right person reads them, they do. One date glows faintly in the firelight today's. You glance around. 2 riders arrive just before dawn. They say nothing. The guard nods once. The riders vanish again. Later, the merchant tells you about a famous blade once passed down from spy to spy. It held 30 years of etched instructions. The last owner died before fulfilling the final mark. No one knows what it meant, but every year on that date the sky turns red just before rain. Coincidence, probably. But nobody schedules anything on that day anymore. You think of your own knife now, blunt, boring, undecorated. What if its grooves were more than wear? What if you've held a story in your hand this whole time and never read it? One night, your merchant unpacks a small pouch inside a dagger with only 5 marks. He stares at them long. "They're not mine," he says, and rewraps it. You wonder how many daggers out there are timekeepers for events that never happened. A battle that was called off, a meeting that went unsaid, a rebellion paused forever. The road teaches patience, but the hilt remembers everything. Tonight the caravan stops near a cliffside spring, where moonlight trickles down rock like paint. You rub your tired hands and feel something melt. But it isn't water, and it isn't gone. Your merchant tosses you a pouch. "For your skin," he says casually. Inside, smooth gray stones cool to the touch and slightly fragrant like mint left in shadow. You press one to your palm. It warms quickly, too quickly, then vanishes, not metaphorically, literally. The soft mineral dissolves into your skin like rain into sand. No residue, no moisture, just a faint shimmer left behind, and a sensation like your skin briefly forgot how to be dry. You stare. The merchant chuckles. "You're welcome. These are the infamous stones that melted on skin beauty aid or subtle poison depending on whom you ask. They were rare, volatile, and unpredictable. Mined in tight seams beneath volcanic ridges where certain minerals fused in odd ratios, then harvested only under waning moons. Any other time, and they were inert, or worse." Historians disagree on their original purpose. Some argue they were cosmetic used by queens and dancers to soften hands and smooth faces before ritual appearances. Others insist they were medicinal, absorbing toxins heat or pain directly through the flesh. But a darker theory lingers in footnotes and travelers' warnings that they were never meant to heal, only to mark. Certain scrolls describe stone skin as a sign those who used the minerals too often developed a sheen that wouldn't fade. Some glowed faintly in candlelight. Others found their fingerprints altered their touch oddly conductive. One poet claimed his skin began to reflect dreams. More than a few users disappeared. You ask your merchant if they're safe. He hesitates. "That depends on what you're hiding." Some stones left a light fragrance behind lavender citrus, sometimes something like iron. You sniff your hand now. It smells like smoke but sweet. Others said the stones carried memory. If you melted one over a scar, the pain might return not physically, but emotionally. One soldier claimed he relived the worst hour of his life every time he used one. "I prefer the itch," he reportedly said. Later, in a desert city built from white chalk and wishful thinking, you meet a woman whose palms shimmer faintly, even in shade. She wears gloves. When you ask if she's used the stones, she nods. "They helped," she says. And then they remembered too much. She presses a small pouch into your hand before vanishing into the market. That night, you melt another. This one leaves no scent, but your dreams turn vivid colors you've never seen, voices in dialects you don't know. A feeling of being watched gently like by someone who used to care for you long ago. The next morning, your skin looks unchanged. But birds keep landing near you, just watching. The heat hums. The sand swirls. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a shape lurches toward you in rhythmic plodding. But no one called out. No signal was given, except the drum. The merchant pulls it from the cargo like it's sacred. A small, round leather drum goatskin stretched tight over cedar edges, darkened from age, from oil, from use. No markings, no paint. Just worn handles and a single strip of faded red cloth tied to its side. He strikes it once, and somewhere far across the dunes, a camel bellows in reply. These are the legendary leather drums that summoned camels. If you believe the stories, and by now, it's easier to believe than not, there were rhythms that called animals from over the horizon, beats so deeply tied to routine memory or mystery that the beasts responded like trained soldiers or friends. It wasn't magic, not officially. Historians think it began as simple conditioning. The sound of the drum meant food, shelter, companionship. Camels remembered. Some claimed they even dreamed in rhythm. But there were also rhythms no one dared play. One legend tells of a drum pattern called the Lost Line, a sequence that, when struck correctly, would summon camels that hadn't been seen in generations. Buried herds, they called them, the soundless ones, the ones still walking in sand no longer there. Your merchant tests 3 beats in succession. Low, low, high. Within minutes, the sound of plodding hooves rises over the ridge. Not your camels. Strays. 2 of them. No tags, no gear. They walk straight into camp, lie down, and fall asleep. You ask him what he played. Something my grandfather's grandfather was told never to use, he says with a wink. Some tribes used the drums to communicate between distant outposts. Others used them for burial ceremonies. A camel that died without hearing its master's rhythm was said to wander even after death. The ghost herds were not metaphor, not to those who lived with them. A few ancient traders reportedly beat the drum only once per day, always at dusk, never more, and never while ill. If the rhythm broke, the herd might vanish overnight, or come back angry. One elder believed camels responded not to sound but to scent carried by sound. That certain vibrations in the leather carried traces of home, of salt sweat, dried milk, and spice. They don't hear you, she said. They remember you. You try the drum. Just 1 beat. No reply. But hours later, as twilight falls, your camel long missing, presumed gone, returns to the edge of the camp, matted, tired, staring directly at you. She nudges the drum, then lies down. Coincidence, perhaps. Or maybe some bonds don't break. They just wait for the rhythm to return. The well is dry. The dust clings. But something beneath the earth is humming a faint sound, like wind caught in strings, or a memory exhaled by roots. You're resting near an abandoned oasis when the merchant stops mid-step. He crouches beside a narrow ring of cracked stones, the remains of a well long since collapsed. But his expression isn't focused on thirst. He's listening. You press your ear to the rim and hear it too. A hum, barely there, like a lullaby lost in stone. Your merchant smiles. Music trees. He opens a pouch and removes a handful of seeds, small, dark, and shaped like teardrops. We plant one, he says, and see if the ground still remembers. You're skeptical. But after everything you've seen, skepticism feels like the weakest tool in your belt. These are the seeds of music trees, so-called not because the trees sing, but because the earth beneath them does. The legend varies. Some say the seeds came from a sacred forest where wind and wood were so intertwined they became indistinguishable. Others believe the trees grew where ancient instruments were buried, flutes, drums, even choirs turned to soil. Still, others claim the roots absorb vibration, storing the sounds of passing generations. Historians still argue over whether the hum is real. Some blame underground streams. Others think certain root structures act like natural resonators. A few claim fungal networks carry electrical pulses that translate into low-tonal sound. But travelers swore by them. Shepherds planted them near herding sites, nomads near their burial grounds. Some left them at crossroads, believing the hum would guide lost spirits or warn the living. Your merchant plants one seed, carefully packing the dirt, whispering something under his breath. By nightfall, the hum has changed, deeper, fuller. Not music exactly, but rhythm, like breathing. The animals grow calmer, the wind softens, and you sleep with the strange sense that someone is singing just below your dreams. The next morning, there's no tree, but the well rim is warm. In the next village, an old woman with beads around her neck hears your story and nods. The ground knows songs, she says. It's the rest of us who forget. She gives you a seed of her own. For when the silence gets too heavy, you plant it the next time a storm drives you to shelter under a rocky overhang. Just one seed, just one scoop of earth. By dawn, there's no plant, but the rock sings just once, low, long, like an old cello note carried by memory. And your merchant, he doesn't even look surprised. Some music, he says, is just waiting to be remembered. The road home, if that's what this is, threads across a plain that seems to shift with your thoughts. But it's not the land that's changing. It's the cloth on your shoulder. You notice it after 3 days of travel across oddly featureless terrain. Your cloak, a gift from a trader at the river market, looks different. The embroidery's moved. The pattern, once shaped like a spiral of mountains, now ripples into something resembling a broken chain. You show your merchant. He raises an eyebrow. She gave you one of those cloth that changed weave mid-road. No one's sure where they came from. Some claim the idea began with Desert Scouts textiles, woven with directional cues so that patterns would shift depending on the humidity or grit in the air. Others believe the change was magical, or cursed, or a complex trick of thermoreactive dyes and wind-sensitive threads. Whatever the cause, you are now wearing a map that breathes and maybe remembers. You walk 10 more miles. The weave reshapes again, revealing a set of chevrons in alternating blue and rust. The merchant squints. That's the pass to the Triple Springs. It shouldn't show unless the ground's gone dry behind us, which it has. Later, in a fog-drenched ravine, the cloth coils at the edge, its edges turning soft green. Watch your step, the merchant murmurs. That shade only appears when danger lies downhill. You ask him how it works. He shrugs. No one knows. Some say the thread listens. Others say the thread was someone. The stories get stranger. One version claims the cloth is woven from the hair of 1,000 travelers. Another says a loom was once cursed to only speak in routes, that everything it made would carry whispers of past journeys, threading warnings, and paths into silken thought. Historians predictably disagree. Most assume the effect is natural pigments, reacting to mineral dust perhaps, a kind of barometer sewn into fashion. But none can explain how the patterns sometimes predict what hasn't happened yet. You camp near an abandoned guardhouse. Your cloak flutters in the wind and reveals a new form, a fish curled into itself, surrounded by dots. The merchant pales. It's going to rain. Hard. You ask how he knows. That fish only swims when rivers rise. He's right. By morning, the floodplains stretch like mirrors. You follow the trail stitched into your shoulder, one blue line winding across a field of white. Hours later, you pass a family of shepherds clinging to high ground. You must be from the south, one calls. Only your people wear the walking cloths. You don't correct him. You just keep walking. Later, you meet a man in a blue robe with 7 layers of pattern, each one flickering faintly under moonlight. His cloak has led him halfway across the continent. It hasn't lied yet, he says, but it has forgotten a few roads. You ask if the cloth ever leads people in circles. Oh, yes, he says, but only when you need to turn back. On your final night before reaching the port city, the cloak smooths into one long golden streak. No patterns, no bends, just forward. A final path. The merchant grins. Guess it wants you to finish. You do. And at the gates, the cloth fades into its original form, mountains spiraling inward, as if to say, you've arrived. You fold it away. Not to forget, but to let it rest. Because some maps don't just lead, they listen. Imagine a place so devoted to trade that it forgot how to sleep. Lanterns burned at noon. Chickens were sold at midnight. There was no after hours, no closing soon, only the hum of coins and the clatter of carts. But something changed when the outside world brought timepieces, little ticking traders that shattered the rhythmless peace. The city of Always Market didn't begin as a city. It began as a crossing two paths of dust that tangled and trampled over a patch of open plain. A trader camped there first, then another. Then a tent, a dozen, then 50. Before anyone noticed, the crossing had grown bones. Wooden stalls braided canopies, and roads tamped firm by wheel and hoof. No ruler declared it, no border claimed it. The market simply grew blooming like a stubborn weed across the steppe. And it grew differently. Most cities were born with rhythms, morning prayers, noon bells, sunset curfews. But here there were no hours, just a constant waking barter. You arrive at dusk, though the air doesn't suggest it. Smoke from braziers rises as if it were morning. Lanterns hang like stars, dozens of them mimicking the constellations above. A child is arguing over the price of dates with a man who may be her grandfather or a stranger. A woman is selling maps, except the maps only lead to her own stall. Some say the market was cursed to never sleep. Others say it was blessed. Either way, time became circular here. The merchants wore no watches, kept no rosters. When they grew tired, they nodded off behind spice barrels or leaned against crates of indigo dye. The next in line would wait. Or sometimes trade would resume with a different seller altogether. No one found it strange. The strangest part you learn is that no one left. Visitors who stayed longer than 3 days stopped asking for inns or directions out. They simply joined in. A German tinsmith became a cobbler. A Persian scholar ended up trading saffron thread. Stories drifted of a woman from Samarkand who arrived with a caravan and never stepped foot outside the market again, not because she was trapped, but because the world outside had stopped making sense. There was no mayor, no army, no taxes. Yet disputes were rare. If a man tried to steal, he'd find his legs tangled in invisible rope. If someone cheated with a fake coin, their voice would catch in their throat for a week. Local lore claimed the market had rules, but they were never written down. The bells know was all anyone would say. And yes, there were bells. Hundreds of them. Big bronze bells, little copper ones on strings, clusters of carved wood that clacked like teeth. Every transaction was punctuated by a chime. Every corner had its own tune. Some say you could tell the price of an item by the pitch of the bell rung nearby. But bells need rhythm, and rhythm needs time. That's where the trouble began. One year, a traveling merchant from Genoa arrived. He wore a coat stiff with embroidery and carried a timepiece, a small brass thing round and ticking. He opened a stall, as everyone did. But he rang no bells. Instead, he opened and closed on strict hours sunrise to noon to dusk. No bartering, no banter. Only time slots and cold silences. At first the market laughed. Then they grew curious. Then they copied. Time spread like a polite disease. Clocks began appearing on stall walls. People started wearing hourglasses on cords around their necks, decorative at first, then obsessive. Bell chimes were replaced with scheduled jingles. The market began opening and closing. Someone even tried to enforce rest hours. That's when the forgetting began. A traveler would leave and return a week later to find their favorite rug merchant vanished. A tea seller, once known for mixing jasmine in silence, began shouting prices like an auctioneer. The child who sold candied citrus now scowled behind a clipboard. More worrying, some sections of the market simply disappeared. Overnight, whole corridors folded in on themselves. Locals murmured that the bells had stopped protecting the place. Without their guidance stalls, untethered from the market's pulse, and were swallowed by time itself. Historians still argue whether the city was real. Some believe it was just a caravanserai, with no name misremembered in travelers' tales. But those who believe, they whisper that the market didn't die. It simply receded. It waits in forgotten corners of the world, maybe behind the wrong alley in Tashkent, or buried beneath modern glass in Xi'an. Some claim that if you close your eyes in a true bazaar and ignore all sense of time, you'll hear the chime again. One note, pure pitchless ringing just for you. You catch a glimmer of morning light, except the sun hasn't moved. And neither have the scholars still standing in silence outside a building that refuses to let them in. They've been there all night, staring, reading, whispering, but no one touches a thing. Because in this city, knowledge isn't meant to be held, it's meant to be seen from a distance. The library, without doors, is not quite a building, not in the way you expect. It has no steps, no hinges, no hallways. It looks more like a vast, circular sculpture stone columns, hold up an open roof, and between them stretch panels of thick, glassy crystal. Behind the crystal, arranged like precious idols, sit rows and rows of ancient scrolls, ink-etched tablets, bound books tied in silk thread. It's beautiful. But you can't go inside, because there is no inside. You approach the outer ring, joining a half-dozen others already standing there. They hold their breath as they read. Eyes track symbols, written in languages you half recognize: Sanskrit, Old Sogdian Mongolian script that dances like reeds in wind. No one speaks above a murmur, and no one steps closer than the chalk ring drawn in the dirt, exactly 2 paces from the glass. No one knows who built this place. It's not on any trade route not marked on Silk Road maps. Some say it was an imperial experiment, Qin scholars exiled for treason still teaching in silence. Others think it's older, perhaps something Buddhist, perhaps something stranger. One theory suggests it was a monastery built by a sect who believed physical contact corrupted truth. There's a story of a prince who tried to touch the glass. He walked past the chalk, raised a hand. The glass stayed cool, smooth. But when he looked back, the others had turned away. He vanished before sunset. His name is still whispered here, not in reverence, but as a warning. A scholar beside you clears his throat quietly. He points to a passage you hadn't seen, traced in crimson ink on a scroll titled The Wind's Arithmetic. The writing shifts slightly as you read. It seems to respond. Words realign. Sentences shuffle. It's not illusion, it's deliberate. Some say the books rewrite themselves every few days. Others think they only change for certain eyes. One woman, a former merchant from Shiraz, claims she visited 6 times and each time the same book told a different story. The only constant A line at the bottom. If you touch, you forget. You begin to notice more oddities. One man stands with a scarf over his mouth, as if afraid of breathing on the glass. A child writes notes backwards on parchment. A woman wears mirrored lenses that reflect the text instead of reading it directly. What is being protected? The books from you, or you from them. There's a common tale repeated among the visiting scholars, usually late at night in shared tents just beyond the stone plaza. They say that once long ago someone did touch a scroll. Not through the glass, but one that had somehow been left outside by accident or by test. The scroll was in an unknown script. The man tried to translate it. His notes survive tucked away in a monastery miles away. But his translations make no sense. Words like dreaming ink mirror bone the end of vowels. He died 3 days later, quietly, peacefully, after reciting an unknown lullaby for hours. His final act, burning his own notes. Still, the library persists. Rain doesn't stain it. Wind flows through its arches, but never topples anything. The books inside remain dustless, ageless. Some believe they're not even written in ink, but in condensed time. Historians still argue whether the library without doors ever existed. Some claim it was simply a carved rock shelf mistaken for grandeur. Others point to traveler sketches, consistent, recurring designs, all with the same uncanny symmetry. But for those who believe, and some still do, the rules remain clear. You may look, you may learn, but never ever reach. You leave quietly your breath, fogging the air just enough to blur the glass for a moment. On the other side, a scroll seems to shimmer. You don't look back. The wind shifts. Your throat is dry. You hear what sounds like music, but there are no instruments, no musicians, just a faint rising melody that curls up from the earth itself. And ahead, hidden in a fold between golden hills, lies the wellspring that only sings once each year. They call it the fluted mouth, though it has no lips, no voice. Just a rough circle of stones surrounding a spring that seems to sleep for most of the year, silent still, just another basin of ancient runoff from distant snowmelt. But come spring, never the same day, never announced it sings. You wouldn't believe it if you hadn't heard it for yourself. It starts soft, like a reed pipe warming up in a distant room. A whistle, then a harmony. Notes that don't quite match any scale, you know, yet feel oddly familiar, like childhood memories of lullabies never sung. The sound draws them in, always has. Locals, travelers, even the skeptics who swore they only came to sketch the site when the music starts, all of them drift closer. Heads tilted, eyes clouded with a strange kind of peace, like birds lulled by the wind before a storm. And then they drink. It looks like water, clearer than anything you've tasted, cold without ice, sweet without fruit. One sip, and your heart steadies. Another, and you forget what time it is. A third, and you remember things that never happened. That's when they vanish. Not in a puff of mist, not in a flash of light. No, they simply don't return. You blink, and the person who had stood beside you, cupping spring water to their lips, is no longer there. Their footprints remain. Maybe their bag, but not them. Villagers used to send watchmen during the season of song. They roped off the well. Posted signs in 3 languages, do not drink during singing, but the melody always drew them in. Sometimes it entered dreams. Sometimes they say it sang names. There's one carved record still preserved in a nearby shrine, etched into clay sun-fired, kept under shade. It lists the names of 52 people who went missing in a single season: traders, scribes, shepherds. All vanished within a 10-day stretch. Most drank from the well. Some may not have. The list ends with a single phrase circled in ochre paint, returned in silence. What that means, no one knows. One legend claims a boy reappeared a year later, naked, speaking backwards, eyes glowing faintly blue. But even the locals admit that sounds a bit too dramatic. Still, the well remains, watched carefully, nervously. There's no scientific explanation. A few scholars suggested the sound was produced by wind, rushing through underground caverns shaped like a flute's bore. Another team claimed the mineral composition caused hallucinations, but the music has never been recorded. Attempts to capture it always fail. Microphones stop working. Batteries drain. Pencils snap mid-sketch. Historians still debate whether the fluted mouth was real or a metaphor for ritualistic purification rites. But then there's the foreign cartographer's diary from the 1700s, found in a Lisbon archive, whose final entry ends with, "I have drunk. The song is inside me now. I feel like I'm humming." He was never seen again. The most curious part: the well doesn't just sing once a year, it sings once per person. Each traveler hears it on a different day, some on arrival, others not until their 7th visit, but always only once. If you miss it, it never returns. The melody fades as quickly as it begins. One final note rising, held in tension, then gone like a rope snapped mid-pull. And the well goes still, clear, silent, waiting. You feel the urge to taste it. Just a drop. Just enough to hear your own memory again. But you don't. Instead, you whisper a name into the well. One you haven't spoken aloud in years. The water doesn't ripple. But somewhere, faintly, a note echoes in your ear. Shadows stretch in the wrong directions here. You step into a clearing, half expecting walls or towers. Instead, only open space and shade that moves like soldiers. This is no fortress of stone or wood. This is the city defended by absence. The fortress, with no walls, is perched at the edge of a ravine, too wide to leap and too deep to light. You expect battlements, gatehouses, ironwork. But when you arrive, all you find are footprints circling empty ground, and the shifting of shadows that aren't yours. Locals say the city was never conquered. Not once, despite having no defenses that anyone could see. Its outline is drawn only in the way light avoids certain shapes. Morning sun pours across the ground until it hits nothing, or rather, until it hits something invisible. A line appears in the dust, a crack in the light. You reach your hand out, and though there is nothing to touch, your fingers stop short. Cold presses back. You aren't the first to test it. An 11th century warlord supposedly brought 400 men to storm the settlement. He expected no resistance. What he found were soldiers who couldn't be seen, and voices that answered every command with a delay, like echoes from a future version of himself. He turned back after 3 days, having lost half his force to what he called their own confusion. His account survives in a scroll that refers to the city not by name, but by behavior, that which does not fall. You wander deeper, passing outlines marked by herbs planted in spirals. There's a courtyard here, or what might be one surrounded not by columns, but by darkness shaped like columns. When clouds pass overhead, the shadows grow sharper, thicker, almost solid. A man in a deep blue robe appears. He doesn't greet you, but he gestures silently to a section of earth. A chair of light is waiting there empty. You sit. The shadow behind you deepens slightly, as if nodding. He begins to tell the history, not with words, but with motion. His hands weave patterns that darken the ground beneath them. As he moves, shapes form. A wall, a roof, a stairwell, each built from shade alone. You realize he's showing you the entire architecture of the city. It exists not in substance, but in contrast. There is one story you hear from travelers who stayed long enough to count sunrises, that during the spring equinox, the fortress becomes fully visible for exactly 5 minutes. Just after dawn, the first light hits the valley floor, and the entire city appears in full silhouette as if carved into the morning itself. They say it's the only time you can walk through it without resistance, but not everyone who does returns. One woman, an herbalist from Bukhara, entered the silhouette corridor during equinox. She returned just before sunset, aged 20 years. Her hair silvered her fingers, trembling as though burned. She never spoke again, except to murmur, "The walls, remember who walked past?" There is a rumor still debated among scholars that the city is built not of shadows, but of time itself. That each wall is a moment you're not meant to see. That to touch them is to collide with a memory that isn't yours, which explains the cold, the resistance, the silence. Historians still argue whether it was a city at all or a ritual site designed to manipulate perception. Some suggest mirrors were involved. Others insist it's a legend meant to deter desert bandits. But then there's the eclipse. Only once in recorded history did the fortress fall. Not to an army, not to fire, but to absence. The total solar eclipse of 1430 swept over the region. Light vanished completely, and with it, the shadows. In those moments, raiders entered, without resistance. They reached the central plaza, found no gold, no gates, no keep. Just a single obelisk carved from polished basalt, taller than any horse, colder than the night. They tried to remove it. It would not move. By the time the light returned, the raiders were gone, leaving behind all their weapons, a handful of cracked teeth, and a trail of blood that led back into the obelisk. It still stands, untouched, untouchable. You rise from your shadow chair, unsure how long you've sat. The man is gone. Or perhaps he never was. As you leave, your own shadow tugs at you just slightly, like a child unsure if they're allowed to follow. The wind changes here, not just direction, but personality. It whistles with a purpose, pushing and pulling with an almost musical stubbornness. And ahead, rising from a barren ridge like a ship frozen mid-sail, spins the windmill palace. They say it turned with the seasons, that every quarter of the year, the entire structure shifted its orientation doors, moving from east to west rooftops, rotating like weather vanes. Built not of stone, but of sails beams and vast creaking lattices, the palace danced with the air itself. You step into its shadow, and it feels like standing beneath an enormous sleeping beast. The windmill palace was more than a single building. It was a settlement, a philosophy, an act of architectural defiance. Created by a coalition of inventors and exiles, it stood at the edge of 3 great winds: the mountain breath from the north, the desert whisper from the west, and the sea's sigh from the south. No nails held it down. Everything was woven hooked or weighted. When the winds changed, the palace changed. Rooms spun slowly, pulled by enormous canvas wings rigged to central masts. Walls folded inward, revealing staircases. Courtyards turned into chambers. The kitchens rotated every week to find the freshest breeze. They say it wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. The wind dancers, A sect of sky worshippers believed that stagnation was the root of suffering. Stillness, their founder wrote, is the grave of perception. So the city moved, always gently, always with grace, except once. That year the winds didn't come. The spring arrived dry and still. The sails hung limp. The central mast, called the sky tether, groaned under its own weight. Without motion, the structure began to settle. Floors no longer adjusted for tilt. Rooms flooded or overheated. Dust collected in corners that hadn't existed before. Worse, the people began to grow. Anxious. They spoke less. They walked more slowly. Arguments started about which room belonged to whom, now that the palace no longer rotated to balance them. One man insisted his chamber had aged faster than the rest. A girl claimed her bed kept drifting, though the room itself didn't. The wind dancers held daily rituals to summon movement. They burned cinnamon and pine sap. They sang into kites. They even tried tethering clouds with mirrored ropes to lure back the air. Nothing worked. Then the dreams began. Residents reported hearing creaks and groans, not from the palace, but from inside their own bones. One woman swore her joints aligned with the gears of the city. A boy went deaf for 3 days, except he could still hear the sails in his spine. Desperate, the remaining engineers attempted a full reset. They climbed the sky tether and cut loose the counterweights, hoping to nudge the structure into motion manually. They succeeded briefly. The entire western quarter spun a full turn, and then collapsed. That's when the exodus began. Some left by foot, abandoning the palace entirely. Others dismantled their rooms and carried them into the hills like snails with awkward collapsing shells. A few stayed out of loyalty or obsession. But by the next year, the windmill palace stood silent. Now, centuries later, you walk its remains. Sails torn, wrapped around skeletal beams. Doors still perched on their rotational axes, but rusted shut. You find a room with a floor tilted just enough to make your feet question gravity. In its center sits a chair, carved from cedar, shaped like a wing curled inward. You sit out of habit. A breeze stirs your hair. Just once. Soft. Playful. Almost a whisper of a time when movement meant harmony. Historians still debate whether the windmill palace was real. Its design defies easy replication, and no blueprints have survived. Some say it was metaphor, a warning about ambition. Others argue it was simply a wind farm mistaken for architecture, but in the right weather, travelers have claimed to hear it. A creak, a hum, a distant flap of sails. Not from the ruin itself, but from the wind remembering how to dance. You arrive expecting silence, but are greeted instead by a ticking chorus. Not in unison. Never in unison. Because here, every house keeps its own time. And every tick, every chime, leads you further from certainty. The clockmaker's city isn't large, just a few streets wrapped like ribbon around a hill. But you quickly lose track of where you've been, and more alarmingly, when. The first clue, the shadows. At the entrance gate, they fall long and thin as if it were sunrise. But 2 streets down, they shift sharp and short like midday in summer. On the third road, you notice a dusk-like hue, even though the sky above remains unchanged. And then there are the clocks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All styles and shapes sundials etched into stone benches. Pendulums carved from ivory hourglasses the size of wine barrels. Each home has at least one timepiece bolted to its outer wall, and no two agree. One says 2:03. The next says 8:47. A third offers nothing but a slow spin of colored discs and a whisper, midnight again. It's not chaos. It's ritual. The people don't seem bothered. A baker informs you quite confidently that her oven runs on rose time, which she explains as a scent-based chronology based on blossom behavior. A man sweeping the steps of a shrine says he prays when the crow says so, tapping the top of a bird-shaped brass chime. You check your own timepiece. It spins backwards slowly. You put it away. The origin of the city is as unclear as its chronology. One legend claims it was built by a single family, clockmakers exiled from 3 different empires for refusing to standardize time. They arrived here and declared, "Let each hour be what it feels." They built timepieces based on mood weather, moonlight, and memory. One famous tower, the Tower of Return, only chimes when someone walks by who's been here before. Another house's clocks are based on emotion. Anger slows the hand's joy wins them faster. You visit the central plaza, where 12 clocks tower over the square, each one named after a different kind of time. Memory time, story time, waiting time, grief time, lover's time. None match. But the city functions. Merchants open their stalls when the shadows reach their ankles. School children attend lessons that begin when the chalk owl's tail glows. Couriers deliver mail sealed in wax that melts at the sender's preferred hour. There is one unsettling custom. Visitors must wear wandering watches, tiny handmade timepieces that tick according to your sense of time. If it breaks, you're asked to leave. You wonder how often that happens. You meet a scholar who's been studying the city's clocks for 9 years, or 3 days. He's not sure anymore. His notes are tattooed across his arms in different shades of ink, each representing a different chronological system. He tells you of a woman who lived here for a week, but aged 30 years, and another who stayed for a month, but left with memories of a life she never lived. Historians still argue what caused the city's divergence from universal time. Some believe it sits at the crossing of ley lines. Others think it's a form of resistance a city built as protest against empire standard hours and trade-regulated minutes. But the most whispered theory? That time here isn't broken. It's personalized. And that's why it's dangerous. Because the longer you stay, the more your own time forgets its place. Your watch now ticks irregularly. You think of events in the wrong order. You remember a conversation from tomorrow. You feel older, but your reflection looks younger. You sit beside a fountain that burbles and bursts once for each forgotten hour and close your eyes. A bell chimes. Somewhere, a child laughs, calling out a time that doesn't exist. You believe it. You notice it by accident. There are no graveyards here. No shrines with incense smoke. No mourners in black. The town where no one died doesn't feel cursed. It feels unfinished. Like a sentence waiting for a final word that never arrives. The first thing you see is a garden. Meticulously tended. Rows of pale marigold, silver, basil, violet night flowers, all known for their funeral associations in nearby regions. But no funerals happen here. You ask a woman pruning the basil if anyone's been buried recently. She smiles politely. "Oh no," she says. "We don't do that. Not we don't have that. We don't do that." At first you assume this must be a euphemism, maybe cremation sky burials, something unfamiliar. But when you press further, residents look puzzled, not evasive, genuinely confused. "We haven't had to," says one man, an herbalist. "No one here dies. They don't mean they're immortal. Accidents happen. People age. But there's no record of illness turning fatal, no tales of final breaths or long vigils. People simply go missing. Sometimes they wander off, a school teacher tells you, into the hills. or out with a caravan. She doesn't sound alarmed, and then they don't come back. You ask if anyone ever finds bodies. No, she says. Why would we? You feel a chill? Then not from fear, but from uncertainty. Because without death, there's no proof of life's edge. Without endings, how do stories know when to stop? The town keeps excellent records. Births are logged meticulously. So are marriages, arrivals, even the adoption of stray animals. But there are no obituaries, no inherited properties, no documents marked deceased. And yet the population never seems to grow. One house sits empty, beautiful, well-maintained sun, catching on its blue shutters. Who lived there, you ask? Oh, old Mayor, someone replies. She was a weaver. Quiet. We haven't seen her in a while. When did she leave? Pause. Frown. Years ago. Maybe. Or just a few months. You start noticing more details. Shoes placed carefully by doors, but no footprints. Teacups left out still full. Dogs that sleep beside empty chairs, tails thumping as if someone just stood up. Some believe this place was built on sacred ground. Others think it's caught in a soft loop, a place where endings are too shy to arrive. A few even say the town was once the site of a forgotten empire's failed immortality experiment. That something lingered. Not eternal life, but something else. There's an unspoken rule here. No one asks where someone has gone. If you break it, people look at you with concern, maybe pity. As if you're chasing shadows you weren't meant to notice. You hear rumors of the river. It runs past the edge of the town, quiet, glassy, and slow. They say people walk there when they feel ready to leave, sometimes with a smile, sometimes while humming, but always alone. No boats are ever launched from its bank. Once, a traveling poet tried to map the disappearances, create a timeline, a pattern. She spent years in the town, interviewed hundreds, charted family trees. Then one day, she was gone too. Her notebook was found beneath the oldest oak in the village square. It held only one entry, freshly inked. There is a silence here that eats sound gently. I think I will lie down inside it. Historians still dispute the town's reality. Some call it a myth invented by monks who feared death and sought to write it out of the world. Others suggest it's a metaphor for grief's denial, an allegory-made architecture. But if you visit, you'll find the streets swept clean, the air rich with jasmine, and homes that wait without sorrow. You'll also find your sense of time softening. Hours pass, but don't accumulate. You may forget why you came, and when it's time to go, no one will stop you. But no one will say goodbye either. It takes longer than you expect to find the entrance. A staircase that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. A vendor who vanishes as soon as you ask for directions. Because the Sandstone Labyrinth Bazaar doesn't want to be found by strangers. And once inside, it may never let you go. From the surface, it looks like nothing more than a ruined courtyard, a few broken arches, some scattered pottery, maybe a mosaic half swallowed by dust. But if you follow the smell of saffron and heated copper, the stairs appear. Not built, revealed. You descend slowly. The air cools by degrees. Sounds change. The wind no longer whistles. It hums. At the base of the steps, the bazaar opens around you not wide but deep. A tangle of corridors carved into amber sandstone. Tunnels curve and fork. Paths overlap. There are no maps, no signs, and no two visitors experience the same layout. Each stall glows with its own mood lighting, flickering lanterns, bioluminescent ink mirrors that reflect things not directly in front of you. You pass vendors selling obsidian combs, painted sand spools of thread that stitch themselves when held. A man sells silence by the handful, wrapped in beeswax and tied with string. You try to keep track of your path left at the spices, right at the place, with floating coins. But the coin seller is gone when you return. His stall replaced by a narrow cafe that serves only one dish hot broth that tastes like a childhood memory you can't place. Locals move with confidence. They carry baskets without hesitation. They seem to know where things are, where the saffron thread unspools, where the old woman still sells fig leaf boots. When you ask for directions, they grow quiet. One nods vaguely. Another shrugs. A child just runs away. Because if you need directions, the market no longer trusts you. One visitor, a scribe from Antioch, once tried to sketch a map. He paced, marked each turn with chalk. After 5 hours, he found himself back at the entrance, except it wasn't his chalk on the walls. It was someone else's, in a script he didn't recognize. The lines pulsed gently. Some say the bazaar is sentient. Others insist it's simply a genius design made by generations of merchants who understood how to build privacy into commerce. There's a legend of a hidden market within the market, a secret ring of traders who deal in ideas, memories, and unfinished thoughts. You can only find them if you get lost for the right reasons. Not panic, not greed. Curiosity, maybe. Regret, love. One man, a miner's son turned traveling perfumer, wandered for 3 days with no food. On the 4th morning, he found a stall that sold wind. Bottled gusts from mountain passes. He bought one, opened it. It carried him out. He never returned, but the bottle did. There's a rule you hear whispered, from one shadowed archway to another. If you hear your name, do not answer. Not unless you know who said it. And even then, maybe not. Because the market listens, and it tests. Historians still struggle to categorize the sandstone labyrinth. Was it a trade hub? A sanctuary? A prison? Its architectural impossibility frustrates modern archaeologists, many of whom report losing time during their visits. Some claim it has no true center, only a core that shifts depending on who's asking. Eventually, you find a passage upward, tight spiraling steep. You climb turn after turn until the light returns, and when you emerge, the courtyard looks unchanged. But the arches aren't in the same place. The mosaic has grown, and your pockets hold a receipt for something you don't remember buying. Your footsteps echo too loudly. The city ahead is bright too bright. Every window is lit, every door open, but no one is asleep. Because here, the only law is to stay awake. Dreams are no longer private matters, they're escapees. You don't remember how you got here, just that you woke up walking. And now, the city stands around you humming, with the kind of activity that feels forced. Streets are too clean, eyes are too wide, and no one blinks often enough. A metal plaque on the city gate reads, "Somnia est periculum." To sleep is to risk. You laugh at first, but no one else does. There are hammocks, yes, but all strung high, empty, dusty. No mattresses, only chairs. Cafes run on strong tea and whisper quiet music. Conversation hums like bees in winter, tired bees. You see a woman with permanent shadows under her eyes weaving tiny bags of salt. She offers you one. Keeps the dreams away, she murmurs, or traps them in the corners. No one here speaks of sleep as rest. They speak of it like infection. You ask a young man in a cloak, why the fear? He says it started when dreams became real. Not metaphorically, not imaginatively, literally. They say it began with a boy who dreamed of a bird with 7 wings. The next morning, it appeared perched on the city's water tower, hollow-eyed, watching. By nightfall, the tower had fallen. After that, a woman's nightmare of glass rain became a week of shattered rooftops. A merchant dreamed of losing his hands. He woke to find them smooth like polished wood. Scholars came with scrolls and stern warnings. They left soon after. One went missing, one went mad, and the last still wanders the marketplace muttering in rhyme. So the citizens made a choice: banish sleep. They built distractions, games, riddles, infinite lantern puzzles, and clocks with random chimes. Sleep inspectors walk the streets. They don't arrest you, but they ring a bell if you look too drowsy. Loudly, right in your ear. Children are trained. Early naps are only allowed until their 4th birthday. After that, caffeine berries, peppermint soaked in vinegar, whispered stories about what the last sleeper saw. But it doesn't always work. People still nod off sometimes. A man slips behind a curtain, thinking he'll just sit for a minute. His eyes close. The dream arrives slow and sticky, a walking honeycomb made of teeth. And when he's shaken awake, the wall behind him is gone. They patch it up, of course, with polite smiles. But the fear deepens. A few citizens still remember when dreams were safe. They speak of sleeping before mirrors, of dreaming in pairs to share burdens. But those stories are old, too soft for this place now. There are rumors of one district deep in the city's spiral where sleep is allowed, where a guardian waits half dream, half memory to guide your mind safely through the maze. But no one will tell you how to get there. Or perhaps you have to fall asleep to arrive. You find yourself yawning now. The salt bag weighs heavy in your hand. You bite your cheek. You hum. You name the years, backwards from 20. Your eyes still close. And in that half second of flickering dark, you hear a voice. It says your name. And it isn't yours. Historians argue whether the city ever existed. Maybe it's a parable about control. Maybe it was a monastery with an opium ban taken too far. Some think it was a failed experiment in lucid dreaming, sponsored by a forgotten king. But the law remains, carved in iron, printed on paper money, sewn into shirt cuffs. Stay awake. You blink hard. The city is fading. Or you are. You do not sleep. Not yet. Rain isn't rare in this region, but the storm was different. It didn't flood, didn't lash, didn't even roar. It softened, and in one afternoon, the clay town that melted slumped back into the earth, only to rise again days later, shaped by memory instead of hands. The town was built on craft, its buildings molded from reddish-brown clay, mixed with crushed shells and ancient ash. Every structure hand-shaped by its inhabitants, sun-dried walls, domed ovens, courtyards pressed smooth by bare feet. No stone, no brick, no reinforcement, just hardened earth. It worked for centuries, until it rained. You arrive at the edge of what looks at first like a mudslide. Slumped door frames, half-melted walls, roofs like sagging pancakes. But then you notice the pattern, how the structures folded, not collapsed, how they leaned into one another as if tired, as if bowing. The town didn't fall. It reclined. The storm that caused it came from nowhere, a summer squall, with no thunder, no warning, no wind. Just a warm rain that fell for exactly 2 hours. Afterward, the town softened. People were unharmed. They emerged from doorways that no longer had corners. Their homes oozed gently into the street. Ceilings dropped like wet paper. Tables curled like petals. But there was no panic, only awe. And then something stranger happened. Over the following days, as the sun returned and the air dried the buildings, lifted. First, slowly lumps became outlines. Then arches reformed. Windows blinked back open. Whole walls reappeared familiar, yet new. Details had changed, door handles in different places, colors slightly shifted, but the layout remained true to memory. Except no one had rebuilt a thing. The clay rose on its own. Locals say the town had always been alive. Not conscious, perhaps, but attentive. A listening town, as one old mason described it. He claimed it remembered where it had been and what it had been asked to be. You press enough hands into clay, he said, and the clay remembers the shape of belonging. From that point on, they stopped shaping it by hand. They whispered instead. Before sleeping, citizens would walk their property and murmur suggestions. A cooler kitchen, an arched roof, less dust in the east corner, and within days the changes would arrive. Not always exact, but close enough to feel heard. Historians dismiss this as folklore. They claim the town was rebuilt quickly by community effort. That weathered clay reacts oddly to rapid drying. That shared trauma produces collective myths. But a trader from Kashgar once visited for a single night sleeping in a borrowed room. He told no one his preferences. He left before dawn. A week later, he received a package, a clay model of the room, altered, improved, now featuring a skylight. There is no known post service in the clay town. The place has no official name. Locals simply call it here. Outsiders refer to it as the Malleable Quarter or the Whispering Burrow. One scholar tried to record the town's layout. She found her map rewritten overnight with notes in her own handwriting she didn't remember writing. Her final line in the journal: "The clay knows what I meant. You walk the softened alleys, now noting how the ground feels warm but firm. You pass a wall that is still slightly pliant, as if awaiting its final shape. A child draws birds on it with a damp finger. She doesn't look surprised when the wall hums quietly in return. And somewhere behind you, a door that was never there before opens for the first time. You try to walk straight, but every road curves, every stair loops back, every alley seems eerily familiar. Because in the citadel of one step, all paths lead home. Whether you want them to or not, it's called a citadel, but there are no towers, no battlements, no ruling hall, just a maze of streets arranged in what the locals insist is a perfectly rational grid. But no one can draw it, and no one leaves it by accident. You arrive at what seems like a central plaza. Vendors wave from curved stalls. A fountain bubbles in the shape of a spiral seashell. You walk northeast for 10 minutes, taking lefts then rights. When you look up again, you're back at the fountain. A boy giggles behind a mask of orange linen. One step, he says. That's all it ever takes. You try again. This time, you mark walls with chalk, a door frame, a corner tile, a woven fence post. The marks vanish the moment you look away. You begin counting steps, but your numbers loop. 23, 24, 17, 31, 23, and back again. There's no fear, only confusion wrapped in soft edges. A local potter named Imran explains over tea the city wants you to belong. So it keeps bringing you back to where you're known. Even if you don't know yourself yet, you ask her how to get out. She smiles. Why would you want to? The citadel is circular in plan, or maybe hexagonal, or maybe folded in 4 dimensions. Some buildings lean slightly. Others breathe with the breeze. But the structure doesn't collapse. It just redirects. Streets appear only when needed. If you're hungry, you'll find a soup stall around the next turn. If you're angry, you'll find a silent garden. But if you're trying trying to find something specific, or leave entirely. That's when things tighten. You hear stories of a messenger who tried to deliver a letter outside the walls. He walked for 4 days, only to arrive back at the sender's house. Another man tried to map his footsteps with pebbles. The pebbles followed him, quietly, patiently. It's not a trap. It's a suggestion. The city nudges, rearranges, reminds. One visitor famously declared, "I built a shrine to disorientation here." He stayed for 20 years. His shrine now holds maps that rearrange themselves each dawn. There is one place that remains fixed, the Echo Room, a circular chamber of bare stone deep beneath a cafe that only opens during thunderstorms. Inside, when you speak, your voice comes back in reverse, not mirrored, reversed. Backwards words, backwards breath. You whisper home and hear Emo. You say your name and it replies with one you don't remember but feels like yours anyway. Historians speculate the Citadel was designed as a psychological training ground for mystics. Others think it's the result of ancient star worshippers trying to mimic celestial cycles in stone. A few suggest it's the world's first looped city built on a landscape that folds back into itself through fault lines or magnetic fields. But the people here aren't interested in theories. They live well. They grow their food in hanging gardens that drop seeds into courtyards unannounced. They trade with vendors who never run out of stock, but never quite repeat yesterday's selection. They tell stories that begin in the middle and end at the beginning. And when you say goodbye, they smile because they know you'll be back. Maybe in 5 minutes, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 5 lives. The fountain trickles. You take one step forward, and the plaza greets you again. The air grows thinner. You climb for what feels like hours. Wooden stilts creak underfoot, and the clouds slip past at eye level. This is the garden above the sky, a town not built on earth, but lifted into wind. And when its stilts broke, the sky swallowed it whole. No one is certain why they built it so high. Perhaps to avoid floodwaters. Perhaps to chase stars. Perhaps because the world below was simply too loud. The garden above the sky rose above a cliff-ringed basin, perched on beams of carved tamarisk and ancient cedar. Not scaffolding legs. Legs that walked in the wind. From below, it looked like a forest suspended in the air, houses, blooming on platforms, bridges like silk ribbons, trees growing from soil-filled baskets, tied in bundles and hoisted high. Gardens hung, not just from ceilings, but from ladders and awnings, wrapped around wind chimes and rain catchers. The entire town creaked softly musically with every gust, a constant lullaby of wood against air. They grew everything up there, root vegetables in hanging troughs, fruits ripening beside bells to ward off birds, bees housed in lanterns that glowed when stirred. Water was raised daily by bucket, or sometimes drawn from clouds themselves using fog nets spun of glass thread. No stairs led up, just a rope lift. If you weren't known, the town wouldn't lower it. Visitors were rare and never surprised by what they found, only by how quickly they forgot the world below. You meet an elder named Vera. Her eyes are clouded with age, but her voice is crisp. She tells you of festivals danced between platforms of lovers whispering across rooftops on windy nights. She tells you the only rule: never look down too long, because the sky can take you if you invite it. She also tells you how it ended. Not with a storm, not with war, but with a gentle shudder. One morning, the stilts didn't wake. They groaned once, then stopped. And slowly, one by one, they bent. The whole town tilted. Not all at once like a dream slouching into waking, Walkways fell into the clouds. Gardens poured out like soft green waterfalls. Wind caught rooftops and carried them miles. No one screamed. Vera says she watched her own house lean away. She stepped onto the last platform just as it sank through mist. She's been walking ever since. No one knows where the rest of the town went. No ruins were found. No splinters. No bodies. Just a section of flattened reeds at the basin floor. No burn. No blood. As if the sky had taken it gently, hungrily. Historians still debate whether the garden ever existed. Some call it a metaphor for spiritual withdrawal, a higher state that could not last. Others say it was a practical solution to overpopulation and disease taken to its extreme. There are a few drawings, ink sketches of rooftops in clouds of stilts laced with ivy of walkways that curve with the wind. All unsigned, all found in places where the garden never should have been known. And sometimes, high in mountain passes or desert cliffs, travelers claim to see shadows overhead, moving not like birds, but like rooftops returning home. As you rest at the summit, the wind kisses your cheek. You hear laughter far above. And for just a moment, you imagine a rooftop garden swaying where no ladder can reach. The walls whisper as you walk past, not with wind, not with voices with writing. Sentences shimmer, letters twitch. You look again, and the words have changed. Because this is the city that dreamed in script, where walls don't just speak, they think. You first notice it on a side alley narrow and uneven. A phrase curls across the brick. The stars were kind today, and so was the fishmonger. It's scrawled in perfect looping calligraphy, glowing faintly violet in the shade. You turn your head. The sentence now reads, "The stars lied. The fishmonger never came home." You reach out hesitating, but the ink retreats sinking into the brick like water. This city doesn't use signs or street names. No addresses, no memorial plaques. Instead, its walls tell you what you need or what you fear. Sometimes both. Locals stroll without reading. They treat the words like rain, always present, rarely acknowledged. But you can't stop watching them change. The apothecary's outer wall murmurs stomachache guilt or dreams you'd like to unsee. A bakery, etched with the cinnamon, is sweet today. Unlike your memory. Even the public fountain whispers, you forgot her name again. It's written in water now. You follow a path toward a central square where the walls bloom with poetry. Not beautiful, but familiar. Fragments of your thoughts appear in ink before you finish thinking them. One line reads, "Stop following yourself in circles. You know where this ends. This place isn't haunted. It's haunted by you." You find an old man painting over one wall in thick charcoal strokes. He explains without being asked. Sometimes it remembers too much. He taps his temple. Some stories are best left between dreams. The city has no library, because every building is one. Each night, the script rewrites. Entire histories vanish. New ones appear. Locals sometimes wake to find new memories written across their homes, marriages that never happened. Wars that ended before they began birthdays predicted 2 weeks early. There's a ritual practiced only by the oldest residents. Before bed, they write their truths on a scrap of fabric and tie it to their wrists. In the morning, they compare. Not the dreams, but the facts. What the walls might have changed. Historians still argue whether the city is cursed by language or blessed by thought. One theory suggests it was built on ground rich in iron and magnetite warping perception and inducing mass hallucination. Another says the original architects were calligraphers who worshipped a forgotten deity of ink and silence. A few scholars believe the walls are alive, that the city dreams when it sleeps, and its dreams are words. There are rules, though few agree on them. One whispered guideline: don't read what's written above eye level. Another: if your name appears in red, leave immediately. You test the theory. Your name appears once on a bakery door, in gold. Underneath it, stay a little longer. The bread is still warm, so you do. And for a moment, the ink stops shifting. You wonder if the city trusts you now, or if it's merely waiting for you to trust it. Later, as you pass that same alley again, the wall offers one final line: you never left. Not really. You're just being rewritten elsewhere. There's no door, no threshold, no roof to speak of. Yet pilgrims gather here in silence, staring into a space that seems almost aware. This is the temple with no entrance. You don't step into it, it steps into you. From afar, it's barely noticeable, just a circle of low stone pillars, each one pockmarked and smoothed by time. No carvings, no statues, just space. But something about the arrangement makes your skin tighten. The way the air hums, the way every bird seems to pause its song before crossing that invisible line. There are no instructions, no priests, no relics to kiss, or idols to praise. Just a steady, persistent echo that answers footsteps before you make them. You ask a local, a woman selling lentils near the outer path, what this place is. She shrugs. It was never built, she says. It was always there, like breath. You cross the boundary. Not a gate. There's no gate, but something shifts. The wind softens. Your spine straightens without your permission. And then the sound. Not loud, not music, not quite words, but a resonance. A tone felt more in your ribs than in your ears. Some say it's your own voice played back at the moment before you speak. The echo doesn't follow logic. You whisper something, nothing returns. You speak a lie, it replies with laughter. You admit a secret, it remains silent, but the pillar behind you grows warm. Worship here is not performed. It's extracted. One traveler swore he never said a word, yet left weeping. Another claimed she heard the exact pitch of her grandmother's voice, though her grandmother never left Persia. There are records of emperors visiting in disguise, of prophets who sat for 3 days unmoving, of soldiers who buried weapons outside the circle before stepping in. One woman brought a song no one else could hear and left it behind. Because the temple accepts offerings you don't know you're carrying, at the center is a depression in the ground, perhaps once a fire pit or a gathering point. But no ash has ever been found there. Only dust that shifts into symbols no one agrees on. Some say runes. Others say mathematical formulas. A few swear they're names not of people, but of emotions. The temple has no roof because it does not pray upwards. It listens outward and inward. Historians have tried to mark it. Surveyors have measured the distance between the pillars dozens of times. The measurements change with every visit, just by a hair. Enough to question your tools, then your certainty, then yourself. At night, it glows faintly, not with light, but with presence. People say it's the moon's echo resting on stone. Others say the temple hums in its sleep, dreaming of the voices it's absorbed. There is a legend older than language that the temple is not a structure, but a memory, one shared across every mind that's ever tried to listen to something deeper than sound. That's why there's no entrance, because the temple is already inside you. When you step out, the echo remains. It speaks only once more. You did not come here to enter. You came to be opened. And then silence again, but not empty. Never empty. No flag ever flew above its gates. No anthem was sung. No army marched, no border drawn. And yet, the capital of no country minted its own coins, wealthier than its neighbors, forgotten by history, and quietly undefeated. You find it near a river that has since rerouted itself, veering away, as if unwilling to disturb what remains. Not ruins, just traces. Foundation stones, stair steps that lead to sky, and a courtyard where the wind refuses to speak too loudly. But it was real. You feel it. The capital of no country appears in footnotes and ledgers that mention foreign coin of unusually high purity. Traders wrote of a city with no ruler where taxes were optional, but trade never stalled, and where justice was handled not by law, but by memory. It had no name, or rather many names, each used only once then discarded. Its architecture borrowed from everywhere domes, like Samarkand, arches like Aleppo, colonnades like Athens, doors carved with symbols from 5 writing systems, roads paved with brick stamped by hands from at least 3 continents. Its people were equally mixed. Refugees, artisans, dissidents, dreamers. A potter from Nubia lived beside a papermaker from Bengal. A retired general sold honeycomb next to a man who whispered poems into grain sacks. Everyone spoke something different, but everyone understood trade. You're shown one of their coins, oval silver, no face, just a simple relief of a wind-blown tree roots half visible. The edge bears no date, just one word enough. Their economy ran on weight, not denomination. A loaf cost what the baker said it did. Trust, not enforcement, held value together. Arguments were rare, and when they happened, a curious system took over. A circle. People stepped inside a chalk ring and told their side. Spectators could question, challenge, or simply listen. At the end, a bell was rung. No verdict, just resonance. And somehow, this was enough. Historians still debate how the city survived, how it defended itself without weapons, and why no empire claimed it. Some suggest it wasn't ignored, it was allowed to exist, as a kind of secret valve for the region's overflow of goods, of people, of dreams that didn't fit elsewhere. And yet it vanished. Not in fire or flood, but in forgetfulness. One day, caravans simply stopped arriving. The river moved, the city dimmed. Its buildings, once alive with barter and brightness, emptied. Not abandoned, unremembered. Some believe the city chose to fade, retreating into obscurity as the world around it hardened into borders and bureaucracies. Others say it moved, disassembled overnight, and rebuilt somewhere else entirely disguised under a new name. You walk the open square now. Nothing remains but impressions in stone. And yet when you close your eyes, you can still smell cardamom and copper polish. You hear the slap of sandals and laughter in 5 dialects. A child runs past, just in memory, but leaves footprints in the dust. The capital of no country may be gone, but it never truly needed land. It lived in the breath between languages, in hands outstretched with goods and stories, with no need for titles or thrones. And perhaps when the world remembers how to forget its flags, it will rise again, coin by coin, kindness by kindness. And someone, maybe, you will be the first to notice it. You've walked through cities no maps remember. Places without walls, without borders, without clocks. Some whispered, some sang. Some simply waited to be remembered. The sky above the windmill palace still turns somewhere. The bells of the always market still chime faintly if you're quiet enough. And somewhere beneath your skin, ink still stirs from the city that dreamed in script. These cities weren't lost because they failed. They were lost because the world changed around them, because silence fell, or memory faded, or time itself took a different path. But they're not gone, not really. They linger in stories, in dreams, in the gentle question behind your closing eyes. What if I've been there already? So rest now. Let your mind drift. Maybe tonight you'll walk a sandstone corridor with no map. Maybe you'll sip from a singing spring. Or maybe, if you're lucky, you'll find the way back to a garden above the sky. If this helped you rest tonight, drop your time and city in the comments and tell me which forgotten character or tale you want next.